I stood paralyzed in the marble-floored lobby, staring at 3 garbage bags bulging with my possessions. My potted succulent peeked pathetically from the top of one bag, soil spilling onto my framed achievement certificates. My wireless mouse dangled by its cord from another, like it was trying to escape. "You're 25, Avira said, tapping her silver watch with a manicured nail. "We're downsizing. Get out now." I had just stepped through the revolving doors, my carry-on still trailing behind me. The overnight flight from Phoenix had left my eyes raw and my mind foggy. 12 hours ago, I'd been shaking hands with the CEO of the largest shipping company in the Southwest, securing a contract worth millions after 3 days of nonstop negotiations. Behind Avira stood a cluster of my colleagues: Tristan from accounting, Naomi and Spencer from marketing, Reed from legal. Their expressions ranged from shocked to awkwardly amused. Reed actually smirked, his eyes darting between me and Avira like he was watching a particularly juicy reality show confrontation. "I don't understand," I managed, my voice embarrassingly small in the cavernous lobby. The security guard at the front desk pretended to study his computer screen, but his eyes kept flicking up to watch the scene unfold. "It's simple, Brielle," Avira continued, louder than necessary. "The company is restructuring. Your position has been eliminated. Everything you need is in these bags." The front doors opened and 2 women in sleek business attire walked in, pausing when they noticed our group. Their presence drew even more attention to my humiliation. I felt sweat gathering at my hairline, but the Henderson account, I just finalized. "We'll handle all client transitions." Avira cut me off, checking her phone. "The separation paperwork will arrive by email. Your building access has already been terminated." I reached for my key card out of habit, but it was upstairs on my desk, alongside the notes I'd compiled for Monday's presentation. "My laptop has all my files," I said, suddenly panicking about 3 years of work. "My contacts, my addition." "Company property," Avira smiled thinly. "It has already wiped your personal files to a flash drive." She nodded toward the smallest garbage bag. "Everything else belongs to us." Naomi at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. Spencer studied the floor tiles like they contained the secrets of the universe. "You can't be serious," I whispered, the reality beginning to sink in. "I've been here 3 years. I deserve." "You deserve exactly what you're getting," Avira interrupted again, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Perhaps you should have remembered who runs this department before getting so familiar with our clients." The accusation hit like ice water. I'd done nothing wrong except do my job exceptionally well. "You have 15 minutes before I call security," Avira said, checking her watch again. "I suggest you don't make this more embarrassing than it already is." The crowd watching grew as people streamed in for the workday. Some slowed their pace, rubbernecking like passing a highway accident. Others hurried past, pretending not to notice. I stood there, jet-lagged and disoriented, as my professional life sat stuffed into garbage bags at my feet. 3 years of 60-hour weeks, 3 years of canceled plans with friends, 3 years of being the first to arrive and last to leave. I bent down to gather the bags, struggling with their awkward weight. Nobody moved to help. When I finally straightened, balancing all 3 bags while trying to maintain some dignity, I caught Avira's expression, a fleeting glimpse of something that looked like satisfaction. That's when I knew. This wasn't about downsizing. This was personal. I shouldered my way through the lobby, past the staring faces and whispered comments. The weight of the bags strained my flight-stiffened muscles. Halfway to the exit, my planner fell out, pages fluttering open to reveal color-coded client notes and meeting schedules stretching months into the future. I left it there on the floor, a bright splash of organization amid chaos. Outside in the parking garage, I somehow managed to stuff the bags into my trunk. I slid into the driver's seat and gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Through the windshield, I could see them all still standing in the lobby, watching me through the glass doors. I started the engine, and then, instead of crying or screaming or peeling out of the garage in a fury of burning rubber and exhaust, I did something that would change everything. I smiled. It wasn't forced or fake. It was calm, knowing. I waved at the cluster of people in the lobby, put my car in reverse, and drove away. None of them realized what they'd just done, but they would. Oh, they would. If you're enjoying this story so far, please hit that like button to let me know. Subscribe to catch the next part and leave a comment below about what you think Brielle might do next. Now, let's continue with our story. My name is Brielle Kerwin, and until 3 hours ago, I was the senior client relations specialist at one of the most prestigious consulting firms in the city. I wasn't always the quiet, competent professional they'd just tossed aside like yesterday's lunch. Growing up in a tiny apartment above my mother's struggling tailor shop had taught me to fight for every opportunity. My mother, with her calloused fingers and determined smile, had drilled into me that education was my escape route. Be so good they can't ignore you, she'd say while pinning hems until midnight. I'd won a partial scholarship to university and worked 2 jobs to cover the rest. 4 years of sleeping 5 hours a night while maintaining a 3.9 GPA had earned me my degree and the attention of several recruiters. When the offer came from Avira's firm, it had seemed like a dream. Healthcare benefits, retirement plan, a salary that meant my mother could finally retire. I drove aimlessly after leaving the office, my mind struggling to process what had happened. The Henderson deal had been worth millions. I'd spent months cultivating that relationship, learning about their operations, understanding their pain points. I knew the names of the CEO's children, remembered his assistant's birthday, and had custom designed a solution that addressed every concern their board had raised. Avira had barely participated in any of the meetings, but her name appeared first on all the proposals. That was our unspoken arrangement. I did the work, she took the credit, and the company prospered. Until today. I pulled into a coffee shop parking lot and finally let myself break down. The tears came in silent, angry waves. I wasn't crying because I'd lost my job. I was crying because I'd been betrayed. My phone buzzed with messages from concerned colleagues, not the ones who'd stood behind Avira, but the ones who worked in other departments. News traveled fast. What happened? Are you okay? This doesn't make sense. I ignored them all and dialed my mother instead. They fired me, I said when she answered. Her silence spoke volumes. Then, come home. I'll make tea. My mother's tea couldn't fix this, but her tiny house in the suburbs was exactly where I needed to be. Away from the gleaming office tower with its marble lobby and glass doors. Away from Avira and her watchful eyes. Away from the humiliation. I spent that first day in a fog, recounting the story to my mother, who listened with narrowed eyes and pursed lips. Something doesn't add up, she finally said. Why now? After you just secured that big client? The question haunted me as I lay awake that night. Why now? The timing made no sense, unless someone didn't want me there for the aftermath of the Henderson deal. The next morning, I forced myself to review the termination paperwork that had arrived by email. The legal language was cold and impersonal. Reduction in workforce. At-will employment. 2 weeks severance. Nothing about my achievements or contributions. Nothing about the reason behind the sudden decision. At the bottom of the email was a non-disclosure agreement and a non-compete clause that would prevent me from working with any of the firm's clients for 12 months. I almost signed it automatically, the obedient employee to the end, but something stopped me. A memory surfaced from 2 weeks earlier. I had stayed late to prepare presentation materials for the Henderson meeting. The office was nearly empty when I heard voices from Avira's glass-walled office. The door was partially open, and Avira was speaking to Tristan, her voice carrying clearly in the quiet space. Brielle is becoming a problem, she'd said. The clients are asking for her directly now. Henderson specifically requested her for the Phoenix meetings. So, what are you going to do? Tristan had asked. I've already done it, Avira replied. Minka starts next month. Her father and I go way back. She'll take over Brielle's accounts. What about Brielle? She's young. She'll bounce back. Besides, technically we're downsizing her department. They'd laughed then, the sound slicing through me like a knife. I'd gathered my things and slipped out, convincing myself I'd misunderstood. Surely my stellar performance would protect me. Now, staring at the non-compete agreement, that conversation took on new meaning. I wasn't fired because of downsizing. I was fired because I'd become too valuable, because the clients preferred me to Avira. I closed the email without signing anything. That's when my phone rang. An unfamiliar number with our city's area code. Is this Brielle Kerwin? A man's voice asked when I answered. Yes. Who's this? Calvin Henderson. We met in Phoenix? I've been trying to reach you through your office, but they're giving me the runaround. Something about you being no longer with the company? My heart raced. Calvin Henderson, CEO of Henderson Shipping, was calling me personally. That's correct, I said carefully. As of yesterday. Well, that's downright strange timing, he replied. Especially since I specifically told your boss I wanted you as our point person moving forward. The pieces clicked into place. Mr. Henderson, Calvin, please. Calvin, what exactly did Avira tell you about my departure? His answer chilled me to the bone. She said you'd accepted another position, that you'd left them high and dry right after the contract signing. He paused, but that didn't sound like the woman who spent 3 days helping us navigate our restructuring. So I decided to call you directly. Avira had lied to a multi-million-dollar client about me. I was terminated yesterday, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, when I returned from Phoenix. The silence on the other end stretched uncomfortably before Calvin spoke again. I see. Well, this certainly changes things. Would you be available for lunch tomorrow? There's something I'd like to discuss with you. As I hung up, a notification appeared, an email from another client, asking if the rumors of my departure were true. Then another message, from a junior colleague I'd mentored, expressing confusion and concern. I set my phone aside and opened my laptop. Instead of job hunting, I found myself creating a new document. At the top, I typed, Client Contact List. From memory, I began recording every client relationship I'd built over 3 years. Names, preferences, pain points, project histories, information that lived in my head, not in the company database. Details no non-compete could take from me. By evening, I had 4 pages of notes and a decision. I wouldn't sign the non-compete. I wouldn't fade quietly away. Avira thought she'd eliminated a threat. Instead, she'd created one. As the sun set, my phone lit up with a notification. A text message from an unknown number. Brielle, this is Naomi from the office. Something weird is happening with the Henderson account. Avira can't find your notes, and the client is asking questions she can't answer. Where did you keep the Henderson files? I stared at the message, a slow warmth spreading through me. It had been exactly 24 hours since my unceremonious dismissal, and already, things were starting to unravel. I didn't reply to Naomi's message. Instead, I watched as my phone lit up with 3 more notifications in quick succession. Brielle, it's important. Please call me. Avira is freaking out. The Henderson implementation meeting is tomorrow. The implementation meeting. Of course. The part where all the promises made during negotiations had to be translated into actionable plans. The part I usually handled. I set my phone face down on the table and made myself a cup of tea. My mother watched me from the doorway of her small kitchen. You're smiling, she observed. That's new. Just thinking about something, I replied, stirring honey into my cup. About how quickly they realize they need you? I looked up at her shrewd expression. My mother had survived an abusive marriage, immigrated to a new country alone with a child, and built a business from nothing. She understood more about power dynamics than most corporate executives. Something like that, I admitted. She nodded and returned to her sewing room, where she now made costumes for local theater productions, not because she needed the money anymore, but because she loved creating beautiful things. The next morning, I met Calvin Henderson at an upscale restaurant downtown. He greeted me with a firm handshake and concerned eyes. I checked into the situation, he said after we ordered. Spoke with some board members I know. This wasn't a downsizing. I'm aware, I replied, keeping my voice neutral despite the anger still simmering beneath my calm exterior. What happened yesterday at the implementation meeting was, he paused, searching for the right word, illuminating. Your replacement seemed unfamiliar with the most basic elements of our agreement. Minka, I supplied. She's new, very new. Calvin agreed. And your former boss struggled to answer questions about the custom logistics module you designed for us, the one that was the deciding factor in our signing with your firm. I sipped my water, waiting. I'll be direct, Brielle. We signed with your firm because of you. The board was impressed with your understanding of our operations and your creative solutions. Now we're concerned about implementation. He slid a business card across the table. I'd like to hire you as an independent consultant to oversee the transition. Whatever your former firm was paying you, I'll double it. My heart raced. This was an unexpected turn, a golden opportunity handed to me less than 48 hours after being unceremoniously fired. But something felt off. I appreciate the offer, I said carefully, but I'm concerned about potential conflicts. I haven't signed the non-compete agreement yet, but we've already consulted our legal team, Calvin interrupted. Since you were terminated without cause, and since we approached you rather than the other way around, any non-compete would be difficult to enforce. Besides, he smiled, we're not asking you to take our business elsewhere. We're asking you to ensure we get what we paid for from your former employer. It was elegant. I would still be working on the Henderson account, but now as their representative rather than Avira's. I would be in meetings with my former colleagues, with Avira, monitoring their performance. I'll need to think about it, I said, though my mind was already racing with possibilities. Of course, but don't think too long. We have another implementation meeting scheduled for Friday. As we finished lunch, my phone buzzed with another message from Avira. Where are the Henderson implementation templates? This is urgent. I tucked my phone away without responding and thanked Calvin for lunch. On the drive home, I called Ezra, a lawyer friend from college who specialized in employment law. They can't enforce a non-compete if you haven't signed it, he confirmed after hearing my situation. And terminating you immediately after you landed a major client would make any judge suspicious. Want me to review any paperwork they send? Please, I agreed. And one more thing. If I were to start my own consulting business, what should I know? His advice was thorough and practical. By the time I arrived home, I had a to-do list that included registering a business name, setting up a business bank account, and creating a basic website. 3 days after being fired, I had accomplished all three. I named my consultancy Carowin Solutions and created a simple professional website highlighting my experience in client relations and implementation management. I made no mention of specific clients or projects from my previous employment. That same day, I accepted Calvin Henderson's offer. The first implementation meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. Friday at my former office building. I dressed carefully that morning, a charcoal gray suit I'd never worn to the office before, subtle makeup, my hair styled differently than my usual work look, small changes that added up to a new image. Brielle the independent consultant, not Brielle the subordinate. The security guard did a double take when I approached the front desk. Miss Kerwin, I thought, I'm here for the Henderson implementation meeting, I explained, presenting Calvin's business card. I'm consulting for them now. His eyebrows shot up as he made a quick call, then handed me a visitor badge. 15th floor conference room. The elevator ride gave me time to steady my nerves. When the doors opened on 15, I nearly collided with Reed from legal. Brielle? He sputtered, coffee sloshing in his cup. What are you doing here? Working, I replied simply, walking past him toward the conference room. I arrived 5 minutes early, but Calvin and 2 members of his team were already there, along with Naomi and Spencer from marketing. Their expressions when they saw me ranged from shock, Spencer, to cautious relief, Naomi. Brielle will be overseeing the implementation from our side, Calvin announced, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Naomi's eyes widened. Spencer studied his tablet intently. At precisely 10 a.m., Avira strode into the room, followed by Tristan and a young woman I assumed was Minka. Avira stopped dead when she saw me, her professional smile freezing in place. What is the meaning of this? She asked, her voice low but sharp. Ms. Kerwin is representing Henderson Shipping's interests during implementation. Calvin explained smoothly. Given her intimate knowledge of the project, we felt it was a prudent addition to ensure quality control. Avira's face cycled through several expressions before settling on a tight smile. How resourceful of you, Calvin. The meeting proceeded with excruciating awkwardness. Minka clearly had no understanding of the complex logistics module I'd designed. Avira kept interrupting to clarify points that only confused matters further. Tristan repeatedly checked his phone, as if hoping for rescue. Through it all, I remained professionally detached, asking pointed questions when necessary and taking careful notes. I didn't need to be vindictive or petty. The situation was doing all the work for me. After 2 painful hours, Calvin called for a break. As people filed out for coffee, Avira cornered me by the window. "Clever move," she hissed. "But if you think this little stunt will work—" "This isn't a stunt," I interrupted calmly. "This is business. Henderson hired me to protect their investment. I'm simply doing my job. You're trying to sabotage me." "No, Avira. You did that yourself. When you fired the only person who fully understood this project." Her eyes narrowed. "I've built this department from nothing. Do you really think one client can take me down?" "I don't want to take you down," I replied truthfully. "I just want to ensure Henderson gets what they paid for." It wasn't entirely a lie. I didn't want to destroy Avira or the company. I just wanted justice, and perhaps a little recognition of my worth. As the meeting reconvened, I noticed Naomi watching me with newfound respect. Even Spencer seemed impressed by my composure. By the end of the day, we had a revised implementation schedule that would require twice-weekly meetings, all of which I would attend as Henderson's representative. "Well handled," Calvin said as we left the building together. "Though I admit, the entertainment value alone was worth your fee." I smiled politely but didn't engage with the joke. This wasn't about humiliating Avira, satisfying as that might be. This was about establishing myself as a professional in my own right. Over the next 2 weeks, my phone continued to buzz with messages from my former workplace. Not just from Naomi now, but from other colleagues seeking information about clients, systems, and processes that only I fully understood. I answered some, ignored others, always professional but never giving away more than necessary. Meanwhile, word spread about my new consulting business. A former client called to congratulate me on my promotion and casually mentioned they were unhappy with their current service. Another asked if I could review a proposal they'd received, just as a favor. I redirected these conversations carefully, never soliciting business directly, but making it clear I was available for consultation. It was a delicate balance. I didn't want to appear vindictive or predatory, but I also knew my value now in a way I hadn't before. 3 weeks after my firing, I received an unexpected visitor at my mother's house. Spencer from marketing stood awkwardly on the porch, clutching a manila envelope. "Sorry to just show up," he said when I opened the door. But I didn't want this going through official channels. Inside the envelope was an internal memo about the Henderson account, marked confidential. It detailed mounting concerns about implementation delays and client dissatisfaction. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. Spencer shifted uncomfortably. "Because it's a mess, Brielle. Minka quit yesterday, just walked out in tears after Avira berated her in front of everyone. The client is threatening to cancel, and—" He hesitated. "Avira's blaming you." "Me? I'm doing exactly what Henderson hired me to do. She's saying you're deliberately withholding information, that you're sabotaging the implementation to make her look bad." I handed the envelope back to him. "I'm not withholding anything, Spencer. I'm helping Henderson navigate a system I designed. If Avira can't fulfill the contract without me, that's not my problem." He nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, I think what happened to you was wrong. A lot of us do." After he left, I sat on the porch swing, processing this new information. Avira was growing desperate. Good. But her accusations stung. I had been professional at every meeting, helpful when directly asked. I wasn't sabotaging anything, was I? The thought nagged at me as I prepared for the next implementation meeting. Was I unconsciously making things more difficult? Was I enjoying their struggles too much? I arrived at the office building the next morning with these questions still churning in my mind. But what I found in the conference room pushed all doubts aside. Avira sat at the head of the table, a triumphant gleam in her eye. Beside her was a stranger in an expensive suit. Calvin and his team were already seated, looking uncomfortable. "Ah, Brielle," Avira said with false warmth. "So glad you could join us. This is Dominic from our legal department. He has some concerns about your involvement with this client. Dominic slid a document across the table. We believe you're in violation of your non-compete agreement, Ms. Kerwin. I never signed a non-compete, I replied evenly. It was included in your original employment contract, Dominic countered. Page 17, paragraph 3. He was right. I remembered now. A clause buried in the fine print of my hiring paperwork 3 years ago. A standard boilerplate I'd barely noticed at the time. Calvin frowned. This seems unnecessarily adversarial. Ms. Kerwin is providing an essential service to ensure the successful implementation of the system she designed. Nevertheless, Dominic continued, we must insist that she cease all involvement with Henderson Shipping immediately, or will be forced to pursue legal action. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to me, waiting for my response. I could feel the trap closing around me. If I fought this, I'd be entangled in expensive legal proceedings. If I backed down, I'd lose my only client and my newfound confidence along with it. I glanced at Calvin, who gave me a slight nod of reassurance. Then I looked directly at Avira, whose smile hadn't quite reached her eyes. I understand your position, I said carefully, and I'd be happy to comply with any valid legal obligations. Avira's smile widened. However, I continued, before we proceed, I think we should address the other legal matter at hand. What other matter? Dominic asked, frowning. I opened my laptop and turned it to face the room. On the screen was an email, one I'd recovered from my personal archives the night before. This is an email from Avira to me, dated last year, explicitly authorizing me to develop custom solutions for clients under my own supervision. It effectively creates an exception to the standard non-compete for work I personally developed. Avira's face drained of color. That's taken out of context. The context is quite clear. I continued, scrolling to show a series of similar communications. As is the pattern of authorization for independent work, my lawyer believes this constitutes a modification of my employment terms. It was a bluff. I hadn't actually consulted a lawyer about these specific emails, but the documents were real, saved because I'd been proud of the autonomy Avira had granted me, autonomy that, ironically, had led to my current situation. Dominic reached for the laptop, scanning the emails with growing concern. I'll need to review these more thoroughly. Of course, I agreed. In the meantime, perhaps we should focus on ensuring Henderson's implementation proceeds smoothly? Unless you'd prefer to explain to them why their project is being delayed by internal disputes? Calvin cleared his throat. Speaking as the client, we would indeed prefer to continue with Ms. Kerwin's involvement. Any other outcome would force us to reconsider our relationship with your firm entirely. The threat hung in the air like a storm cloud. Avira's carefully constructed trap had backfired spectacularly. After a tense silence, Dominic gathered his papers. We'll continue this discussion at a later date. For now, the meeting can proceed as planned. As he and Avira whispered heatedly in the corner, I caught Calvin watching me with newfound respect. I'd stood my ground. I'd outsmarted them at their own game, but this wasn't victory. Not yet. It was merely the first real battle in what was becoming a war of attrition. And I was just getting started. The stalemate with Avira continued for the next 2 weeks. I attended every Henderson implementation meeting, providing guidance while carefully maintaining my professional distance. Dominic from legal watched me like a hawk, but never followed through on his threats of legal action. The emails I'd produced had created enough uncertainty to keep them at bay, see for now. Behind the scenes, however, things were shifting rapidly. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from former colleagues seeking advice or clarification on projects I'd managed. I answered when I could, always polite but increasingly brief. My priority was establishing my own business, not solving their problems for free. Calvin Henderson proved to be more than just a client. He became an advocate. He mentioned my services to other business owners in his network, describing me as the problem solver who saved our implementation. 3 weeks after starting my consultancy, I signed my second client. A week later, a third. Meanwhile, the situation at my former workplace deteriorated. Spencer, who had become an unexpected ally, kept me informed through occasional texts. Second implementation meeting disaster. Client threatening to pull out. Avira presented your logistics model as her own. couldn't answer basic questions about how it works. 3 people quit marketing department yesterday. I took no pleasure in their struggles. Well, perhaps a small amount where Avira was concerned, but I remained focused on building something new rather than watching something old crumble. 6 weeks after my firing, I signed the lease on a small office space downtown. It wasn't much, Terry. Just 2 rooms with large windows and enough space for a desk, meeting table, and small kitchenette. But it was mine. No glass walls for others to peer through. No politics. No Avira. My mother helped me move in, arranging my sparse furniture with the same care she once arranged fabric in her tailor shop. "You need plants," she declared, surveying the empty corners. "Life needs growing things." The next day, she arrived with 3 potted plants, hardy, low-maintenance varieties that could survive my irregular attention. One was a cutting from the succulent that had been unceremoniously dumped into a garbage bag on the day of my firing. I'd managed to salvage it, and now its offspring would witness my new beginning. That afternoon, as I was setting up my new computer system, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Is this Brielle Kerwin?" a woman's voice asked. "Speaking. This is Lyra Westerly. I'm the board chair at your former employer." My hand tightened around the phone. The board chair? In 6 weeks of escalating drama, the board had never been mentioned. "What can I do for you, Miss Westerly?" "I think we should meet in person," she replied. "There are some matters we need to discuss regarding your departure from the company and your current relationship with Henderson Shipping." My stomach clenched. Had Avira finally convinced the board to take legal action against me? "I'm available tomorrow afternoon," I said, keeping my voice steady despite my racing thoughts. "Perfect. My assistant will send the details." After we hung up, I immediately called Ezra for legal advice. He agreed to accompany me to the meeting and spent an hour reviewing my situation, the absence of a signed non-compete after my termination, the emails authorizing my independent work, the circumstances of my firing. "Legally, you're on solid ground," he concluded. "But board chairs don't typically get involved in departmental staffing disputes. Something bigger is happening." The meeting was set for 2 p.m. the next day at a private dining room in an upscale hotel downtown. When Ezra and I arrived, we found not just Lyra Westerly, but 3 other board members waiting for us. No sign of Avira. Lyra, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s with a silver bob and understated jewelry, stood to greet us. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Kerwin, and you've brought counsel. Very prudent." She gestured to the others. "This is informal, but we thought it important to meet face to face." We settled around the table, and Lyra wasted no time getting to the point. "We've been conducting an internal review of recent events in the client relations department," she began. "What we've found is concerning." One of the board members, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, slid a folder across the table. "This contains documentation of systematic credit misappropriation, client relationship interference, and potentially discriminatory termination practices," he explained, "all centering around your former supervisor, Avira Donovan." I opened the folder to find emails, meeting minutes, and performance reviews. A paper trail showing how Avira had consistently taken credit for my work, deliberately kept me from certain high-profile meetings, and planned my termination weeks before the Henderson deal was finalized. "We became aware of these issues only after multiple client complaints following your departure," Lyra continued. "Henderson Shipping was simply the most vocal. Others have expressed similar concerns about continuity and account management." I glanced at Ezra, who gave me a subtle nod to continue listening. "Why are you sharing this with me?" I asked carefully. Lyra exchanged looks with her colleagues before answering. "We have 2 proposals for your consideration. First, we'd like to offer you your position back, with a substantial promotion, salary increase, and direct reporting line to the executive team, CS, bypassing Ms. Donovan entirely." The offer hung in the air like an unexpected gift. 6 weeks ago, I would have jumped at the chance. Now, I waited for the other shoe to drop. "And the second proposal?" Lyra smiled slightly. "Alternatively, we'd like to discuss acquiring your consultancy." That I had not expected. "You want to buy my 6-week-old business? We want to acquire your expertise and client relationships before our competitors do," corrected the woman sitting beside Lyra. Your departure has revealed significant vulnerabilities in our client management structure. Several major accounts are now at risk. Ezra leaned forward. Before we discuss either option, we need clarity on Ms. Kerwin's legal standing. There have been threats of litigation regarding non-compete violations. Those threats were not authorized by the board, Lyra said firmly, and they will not be pursued, regardless of your decision today. For the next hour, we discussed details of both proposals. The return offer included a director-level position with a salary double my previous one. The acquisition offer included a generous upfront payment plus a 3-year consulting contract. We'll need time to consider, Ezra said as the meeting concluded. Of course, Lyra agreed, but we would appreciate an answer within the week. The situation remains fluid. Outside the hotel, Ezra and I dissected the meeting. They're desperate, he observed. Henderson was just the tip of the iceberg. They're losing clients left and right without you. But why acquisition? Why not just hire me back? Because they know you might leave again. This way, they lock in your expertise and eliminate a potential competitor in one move. I spent the next 3 days weighing my options. The money was tempting. Either offer would set me up financially for years, but returning meant working in the same environment that had discarded me so callously. Acquisition meant giving up my newfound independence before I'd truly experienced it. There was also the matter of Avira. Neither option had clarified her status, though reading between the lines, it seemed the board was building a case for her removal. On the 3rd day, as I sat in my new office, staring at the contract drafts Ezra had prepared, my phone rang. Calvin Henderson again. Brielle, have you heard the news? What news? Your former employer just lost the Beaumont account. It's all over the industry forums. Beaumont was their 2nd largest client after Henderson, a relationship that predated even Avira's time at the company. What happened? I asked, genuinely shocked. Apparently, there was a major service failure last week. No one could access the specialized reporting portal your team had built for them. When they called for support, they got a runaround. He paused. Word is, they're looking for new consultants. I may have mentioned your name. After we hung up, I sat in silence, processing this development. The Beaumont account represented millions in annual revenue. Its loss would be devastating, possibly fatal for Avira's department. My phone buzzed with a text from Spencer. Total meltdown here. Avira called emergency all hands. Beaumont gone, blaming everyone but herself. Another piece clicked into place. The board's urgency suddenly made perfect sense. That evening, I made my decision. I called Lyra Westerly directly. I've considered both offers, I told her, and I have a counterproposal. 2 days later, I walked into my former office building, not as a visitor or consultant, but as the newly appointed head of client success, a division created specifically for me that would operate parallel to Avira's department, but with oversight of all major account implementations. The announcement had been made company-wide an hour earlier. Employees stared as I crossed the lobby, whispers following in my wake. The security guard grinned and handed me a new access card, not a visitor badge. Welcome back, Ms. Kerwin. I took the elevator to the executive floor, 2 levels above my previous department. My new office awaited, with windows overlooking the city and a nameplate already on the door. Inside, I found Lyra Westerly waiting. Everything to your satisfaction? She asked. It's a good start, I replied, setting down my bag. The transition team is ready whenever you are. They're eager to hear your plans for the Beaumont recovery strategy. I'll meet them this afternoon. First, I need to address my former department. Lyra raised an eyebrow but nodded. Of course. They're gathered in conference room A for Avira's emergency meeting. Perfect timing. 10 minutes later, I stood outside conference room A, listening to Avira's voice through the door as she outlined desperate measures to prevent further client defections. Must all pull together to weather this storm. I've prepared individual client retention assignments. I pushed open the door. The room fell silent. 20 faces turned toward me, some confused, others hopeful, a few wary. Avira stood frozen at the head of the table, presentation clicker in hand, her carefully applied makeup unable to hide her exhaustion. Brielle, she managed, recovering quickly. I heard about your new position. Congratulations. We were just discussing emergency measures for Fayan. I know what you were discussing, I interrupted calmly, moving to stand at the opposite end of the table. And I'm here to inform you that all major client retention efforts will now route through the Client Success Division. Avira's smile tightened. Perhaps we should discuss the transition privately. After this meeting? There's nothing to discuss, I replied. The board has approved my reorganization plan effective immediately. Your team will continue handling new business development, but implementation and retention for all existing clients now falls under my purview. The room erupted in whispers. Avira's face flushed with anger and humiliation, the same emotions I'd felt standing in the lobby with my belongings in garbage bags. This is completely inappropriate, she hissed. You can't just waltz in and… Actually, I can. It's all outlined in the memo that went out this morning. I'm surprised you haven't read it yet. I turned to address the room. Everyone who worked directly on implementation and client management should report to the executive conference room in 30 minutes for reassignment. That meant nearly everyone present. Avira's department would be gutted, left with just her and a few sales associates. As people gathered their things, expressions ranging from shocked to secretly pleased, I approached Avira directly. Don't worry, I said quietly, so only she could hear. You're not being fired. The board felt that would be too disruptive. You'll keep your title and office. You just won't have much to do besides basic sales. No client contact, no implementation oversight, no team to manage. The color drained from her face as she realized the full implications. This is your revenge, isn't it? You orchestrated this whole thing. I smiled, the same calm, knowing smile I'd given her from my car that day in the parking garage. I didn't orchestrate anything, Avira. I simply became so good they couldn't ignore me. I gestured to the nearly empty room. Everything else is just the natural consequence of your decisions. I turned to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, and don't bother looking for another position in this industry. I haven't said a negative word about you to anyone. I haven't had to. Your reputation has spread all on its own. In the hallway, I took a deep breath. This wasn't about cruelty or vindictiveness. This was justice. Avira would keep her job and salary, just as I'd been left with mine. But she would know, every day, that her power was gone. Her influence, evaporated. Her future, stagnant. She would sit in her glass office, watching as I rebuilt what she had tried to destroy. She would witness clients who once barely acknowledged her now seeking me out specifically. She would see her former team thriving under my leadership. And she would understand, finally, that the quiet, competent woman she had discarded so carelessly had been the foundation holding everything together. My revenge wasn't taking her job or ruining her career. My revenge was succeeding where she had expected me to fail. My revenge was becoming undeniable. Within 6 months, our client retention rate rose from 68% to 97%. Implementation complaints dropped to near zero. The Beaumont account returned, along with 3 others that had been considering departure. Our team expanded, adding specialties and capabilities that attracted new business across sectors. Avira remained in her glass office, handling basic sales calls and preparing reports that few people read. She never quit. That would have been admitting defeat. Instead, she adapted to her diminished role, occasionally attempting to insert herself into client relationships but finding no traction. A year to the day after I found my belongings in garbage bags, the board promoted me to Chief Client Officer, a new C-suite position, created to recognize the transformation I'd led. The announcement was made at the annual company meeting, with Avira sitting in the back row, politely applauding with everyone else. As I took the stage to accept, I caught her eye briefly. There was no anger there anymore, just a resigned acknowledgement of what we both knew. Her greatest mistake hadn't been firing me. It had been underestimating me. That evening, as I prepared to leave my office, I found a small package on my desk, a potted succulent with a simple note, from one survivor to another. Mom. I placed it on my windowsill beside the offspring of my original office plant, the one that had been dumped in a garbage bag, yet somehow survived and thrived, just like me. If you enjoyed this story of resilience and professional revenge, Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more gripping stories of triumph over adversity. What would you have done in Brielle's position? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Remember, sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying others. It's about building yourself into something they can't ignore. The security guard stepped in front of me, his imposing frame blocking the boardroom entrance. "This meeting is for executives only," he said, not unkindly, but firmly. His badge glinted under the hallway lights as my research papers trembled in my hands. "There must be some mistake," I whispered, feeling dozens of eyes from inside the room shift toward the commotion. "I've been working on the Asia-Pacific market expansion for 6 months. The presentation today is based on my research." Through the gap in the doorway, I spotted him, Pierce, my direct supervisor, deliberately avoiding eye contact as he arranged presentation materials that looked eerily familiar. My materials, my graphs, my projections, my late nights and early mornings condensed into color-coded slides now bearing his name. "I have the invitation right here," I insisted, fumbling with my phone to pull up the calendar entry that had appeared mysteriously deleted. The guard's expression softened with something like pity. "Ma'am, I'm just following the updated attendance list. Your name was removed this morning." Heat crawled up my neck as I caught snippets of conversation from inside. Brilliant approach to the regulatory challenges in Singapore. Exactly the boldness we've been missing. Pierce has outdone himself this time. My stomach contracted painfully as I recognized my words, my insights, being attributed to the man who had spent the last month subtly undermining me while harvesting my ideas. The same man who had casually mentioned yesterday that I should take the day to refresh because the meeting probably wouldn't need my input after all. I gripped my portfolio tighter, knuckles turning white. 6 months of research, 3 countries visited, countless video calls at 3 a.m. to accommodate international time zones, all to have my moment of recognition stripped away with a simple deletion from an attendance list. "Is there a problem here?" A woman's voice cut through my thoughts. Mia, the head of human resources, approached with a practice-neutral expression, the kind reserved for situations requiring damage control. "She was trying to enter the executive strategy meeting," the guard explained. Mia blinked twice. "Oh, I see," she said, placing a hand on my elbow and guiding me away from the doors. "Let's chat privately." In the empty conference room across the hall, Mia closed the door and turned to me. "This is awkward. There's been a reorganization of responsibilities. Pierce felt your contribution to the project has been." She paused, searching for the right corporate euphemism. "Supportive, rather than directional." "Supportive?" I echoed, disbelief cracking my voice. "I developed the entire framework. I identified the market gaps. I created the implementation timeline. Those are my slides in there." Mia's expression remained professionally sympathetic. "I understand you're upset. These situations can be challenging. Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding about project ownership." As she continued with hollow reassurances, the elevator doors at the end of the hallway slid open. A tall figure stepped out, surrounded by a small entourage of board members. Even from this distance, I recognized him instantly. From the news articles I'd studied obsessively, since the announcement, Julian Gray, the incoming CEO, arriving a week earlier than expected for his first official appearance. He paused, scanning the hallway with purpose, before his gaze landed directly on me through the glass walls of the conference room. Without hesitation, he changed course and headed straight toward us. Like this revenge story? Hit that like button, drop a comment about what you think will happen next, and subscribe to never miss another episode of Corporate Justice Served Cold. I'm Reese Palmer, 34 years old, and until this morning, I believed my decade of sacrifice for worldwide innovations was finally about to pay off. I'm the woman who skips weekend brunches to perfect financial models, the workaholic who sends emails at 2 a.m. because an idea can't wait until morning, the colleague who remembers everyone's coffee order but forgets her own doctor's appointments. I wasn't always this way. Growing up in a small lake town with parents who valued sunset boat rides over overtime, I once promised myself I'd never become one of those corporate robots. Yet here I was, practically mainlining caffeine, my apartment more storage unit than home, and my most meaningful relationship with my houseplant, which was also dying from neglect. The irony? I excelled at this life I never wanted. My analytical mind could spot market patterns others missed. My perfectionism turned chaotic data into actionable strategies. My empathy, the trait my mother always said would hold me back in business, actually became my secret weapon for understanding consumer behavior across cultures. "Reese, you look surprised to see me," Julian Gray said as he entered the conference room, dismissing Mia with a subtle nod. His voice carried the confidence of someone accustomed to people listening when he spoke. I straightened my posture instinctively. "Mr. Gray, I wasn't expecting you until next week. I prefer to arrive unannounced." Reveals more about the organization. His eyes flickered to the portfolio I still clutched against my chest. "Those wouldn't happen to be the Asia Pacific expansion materials?" My heart pounded. "Yes, but I'm apparently not presenting today." "Interesting, because the board specifically mentioned your name when they sent me the preliminary reports." He checked his watch. "The meeting started 5 minutes ago. Shall we?" Before I could respond, he turned and walked toward the boardroom, clearly expecting me to follow. I shot a glance at Mia, whose carefully composed expression had cracked into genuine confusion. Outside the boardroom, the security guard's eyes widened as Julian approached. "Sir, welcome to—" "Thank you." Julian cut him off, opening the door himself and holding it for me. The presentation had already begun. Pierce stood at the head of the table, laser pointer dancing across my charts, my words flowing from his mouth. He froze mid-sentence when Julian entered. "Please don't stop on my account," Julian said pleasantly, "though I am curious why Reese Palmer isn't delivering this presentation." 24 pairs of eyes swiveled first to Julian, then to me standing behind him, and finally to Pierce, whose complexion had turned an alarming shade of gray. "Mr. Gray, welcome." Pierce recovered quickly. "We didn't expect you today. Reese is an excellent team member who contributed research to this initiative. I'm presenting as the strategic lead." Julian nodded thoughtfully, taking an empty seat at the far end of the table, not the CEO's chair at the head. I noticed. "Please continue then. Reese, join us." He gestured to an empty chair. As I slid into the seat, Pierce resumed his presentation, subtly altering his language, as my team discovered, became, "as we uncovered," and my approach softened to our strategy. I watched the executives' faces, wondering if anyone else noticed the shift. I'd known Pierce was ambitious when I joined his team 2 years ago. At first, I'd admired his ability to navigate office politics while still driving results. He became a mentor of sorts, teaching me to package my ideas for executive consumption. "Raw data doesn't speak for itself, Reese," he'd say. "You need to tell the story." What I hadn't realized was that eventually I'd become just another character in his story, a supporting role he could write out when convenient. The betrayal hadn't happened overnight. First came the omissions from meeting invites, administrative oversight. Then the introductions where my title mysteriously downgraded from strategic director to senior analyst. Finally, the quiet reassignment of my direct reports to other teams while I traveled for research. By the time I recognized the pattern, Pierce had already positioned himself as the visionary behind the Asia-Pacific strategy. My strategy, the one I'd conceptualized after spotting regulatory changes that would create a once-in-a-decade market opportunity. As Pierce clicked to the implementation timeline slide, Julian interrupted. "What about the regulatory hurdles in Singapore? Your proposal seems to gloss over them." Pierce hesitated, clearly unprepared for the question. "We've accounted for standard compliance procedures. The real challenge isn't standard compliance," I found myself saying, unable to stay silent. "It's navigating the new personal data protection amendments taking effect next quarter. They'll require operational restructuring that most companies aren't anticipating." Julian's gaze settled on me. "And your solution?" Pierce tried to interject, but Julian held up a hand, his focus unwavering from me. I took a deep breath. A two-phase approach. First, establish a regional data processing center in Malaysia, where regulations are more flexible. Second, create partnership agreements with local Singapore firms who already have compliance frameworks in place. Julian leaned forward. "The cost implications?" "Initial investment increases by 22%, but we'd avoid the penalties and retroactive compliance costs that will hit our competitors. 3-year projection shows us ahead by 36%. The room fell silent. I could feel Pierce's glare burning into me. Julian tapped his fingers on the table. "Those details aren't in this presentation. They were in the original draft," I said quietly. "I streamlined for clarity," Pierce cut in. "Some technical elements were too in the weeds for this audience." Julian's expression remained unreadable. "I see." He turned to the rest of the room. "Let's take 15 minutes. I'd like to review some materials privately." As executives filed out, whispers already spreading, Julian beckoned me forward. "The complete version of your analysis. Do you have it? I handed him my portfolio. Everything's here. He nodded. Wait outside, please. In the hallway, Pierce cornered me immediately. What do you think you're doing? He hissed. My job, I replied, surprised by my steady voice. You've worked here long enough to understand how things work. Ideas need champions. I'm in a position to make your strategy happen. By erasing me from it, his expression hardened. This isn't personal. It's business. People listen to me. The board respects me. You're still building credibility. Is that why you removed me from the meeting? A thin smile crossed his face. Consider it a favor. These executives eat people like you alive. I'm protecting you while positioning your ideas where they'll actually get approved. The boardroom door opened before I could respond. Julian stood there, my portfolio under his arm. Pierce, Reese, he said calmly. Join me for a moment. Inside the boardroom, Julian had arranged 3 chairs in a triangle away from the conference table. My research was spread across the polished surface in a careful sequence I recognized, not the order I'd organized it in my portfolio, but the logical progression I'd originally designed before Pierce had reshuffled everything. Sit, Julian said, gesturing to the chairs. His tone wasn't harsh, but it left no room for negotiation. Pierce and I sat across from each other, while Julian took the 3rd chair, creating a perfect triangle of tension. Outside, executives milled in the hallway, curiosity barely disguised behind pretend conversations. Let me be clear about something, Julian began, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. I accepted this position because I believed this company had untapped potential being squandered by territorial leadership. His eyes flicked between us. What I've witnessed in the past 20 minutes confirms that assessment. Pierce shifted, adjusting his tie. Sir, if I may. No, you may not. Julian cut him off. Not yet. He picked up a page from the table. This analysis of consumer behavior across generational divides in Southeast Asian markets. Whose work is this? Pierce hesitated just long enough. Mine, I said. Julian nodded, selecting another document. And this regulatory compliance framework with the color-coded implementation timeline? Also mine. The financial projections accounting for currency fluctuation risks? Those are mine as well. Julian turned to Pierce. Would you dispute any of these claims? Pierce's smile strained at the edges. Reese is an exceptional researcher. Her attention to detail is why I selected her for my team. But assembling research into actionable strategy is where senior leadership adds value. Interesting perspective, Julian replied. Because when I received the preliminary reports last week, the board attributed this entire strategic approach to Reese Palmer. They specifically mentioned her innovative regulatory compliance framework as the cornerstone of the proposal. The blood drained from Pierce's face. That's why I was confused when I arrived today and found her barred from the meeting, Julian continued. Even more confused when I saw someone else presenting her work. Pierce leaned forward. There appears to be a misunderstanding. As department head, I naturally guide and shape the work of my team. Let's test that theory, Julian interrupted, turning to me. Reese, explain the cultural sensitivity matrix you've developed for market entry sequencing. For the next 10 minutes, I walk through my methodology, the patterns I'd identified, and how they translated to implementation priorities. Julian asked pointed questions that probed the depths of my understanding, questions that revealed he'd already thoroughly studied my work. When I finished, he turned to Pierce. Now your perspective on the same topic. Pierce stumbled through a response that mixed corporate jargon with vague principles of international business. His answers grew increasingly defensive, as Julian's questions became more specific. Enough, Julian finally said. Pierce, please step outside while I speak with Reese privately. After Pierce left, Julian's professional demeanor softened slightly. How long has this been happening? I measured my words carefully. The credit redistribution? It's been gradual over the past 4 months, but the complete sidelining only happened in the last 3 weeks. And you didn't report it? To whom? Pierce is well connected throughout the organization. He plays golf with the chief operating officer every Sunday. Julian nodded, understanding the unspoken implications. Tell me something, Reese. If you were in my position right now, what would you do? The question caught me off guard. About Pierce? About this situation? About this company's leadership culture? About you? I took a deep breath, recognizing this moment for what it was, not just about Pierce's betrayal, but a test of my own leadership instincts. I wouldn't make an impulsive decision based on one incident, regardless of how revealing it might be. I'd look for patterns, for the system that allowed this situation to develop. Julian tilted his head, considering my words. And if the pattern suggests a systemic issue, then I'd address the system, not just the symptom. Punishing Pierce might feel satisfying, but if the culture rewards his behavior, someone else will simply take his place. A smile, the first genuine one I'd seen, briefly crossed Julian's face. Continue your presentation to the executive team, the complete version, with nothing streamlined for clarity. 20 minutes later, I stood before the reassembled executive team, Pierce now seated in the audience, his expression unreadable. Julian had taken the CEO's seat at the head of the table, my complete research organized neatly before him. As I presented the Asia-Pacific strategy in its full complexity, I watched realization dawn across various faces. Several executives began taking furious notes. Others exchanged meaningful glances. My confidence grew with each slide, each question answered, each nuance explained. When I finished, Julian stood. "Thank you, Reese. That was illuminating." He addressed the room. "I'd like the executive team to stay for further discussion. Pierce, please return to your department. Reese, a word outside." In the hallway, Julian's expression was thoughtful. "That presentation confirmed what I suspected when I first reviewed your work. You have remarkable insight." "Thank you, sir. The question now is what happens next." He checked his watch. "I have meetings for the remainder of the day. Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m., my office. We'll discuss your future with the company." As he walked away, Pierce emerged from the boardroom, his face flushed with barely contained anger. He brushed past without acknowledging me. The rest of the day passed in a blur of congratulatory messages from colleagues who had witnessed my unexpected moment in the spotlight, mixed with worried glances from Pierce's allies. By evening, the office hummed with speculation about what Julian's early arrival might mean for the company's power structure. I stayed late, partly to avoid the awkwardness of elevator small talk, partly to process the whirlwind day. As I gathered my things, a message appeared on my screen from an unknown internal number. "This isn't over. Some battles you win, some you survive. Choose wisely." Sleep evaded me that night. I rehearsed different scenarios for my morning meeting with Julian, ranging from a dream promotion to a courteous dismissal for creating organizational discord. Corporate politics followed no predictable rules, and new CEOs often had loyalties and agendas invisible to everyone else. At 6:45 a.m., I stood outside Julian's office, coffee in hand, heart racing. His assistant hadn't arrived yet, but the light inside was already on. I knocked softly. "Come in," Julian called. He sat reviewing documents, already impeccably dressed, no sign of the early hour affecting his alertness. "Punctuality, good." He gestured to the chair across from him. "I've been reviewing your personnel file." My stomach tightened. Personnel files contained performance reviews, all written by Pierce over the past 2 years. "Interesting reading," Julian continued. "According to your most recent evaluation, you struggle with big-picture thinking and need guidance on strategic applications of research. So, this was how it would end. Pierce's groundwork would discredit me despite yesterday's triumph. Those assessments don't reflect my capabilities," I said quietly. "Obviously," Julian agreed. "They reflect a systematic effort to undermine your advancement." He closed the file. "Which brings me to why I asked you here. I need to understand what you want, Reese. I'm not sure I understand the question. It's simple. After what happened yesterday, I could fire Pierce. Would that satisfy you?" The directness of his question startled me. "No," I answered honestly. "Why not? He stole your work. He deliberately sabotaged your career. Because firing Pierce doesn't fix the problem. The company culture allowed, even rewarded his behavior. Another Pierce would emerge within months." Julian smiled. "Exactly what I thought you'd say." He pushed a document across the desk. "This is why I'm creating a new position reporting directly to me. Strategic Innovation Director. The role would give you oversight of cross-departmental initiatives, including the Asia-Pacific expansion." I stared at the job description, excitement building. This would essentially make me Pierce's superior, yes, along with several other department heads. The opportunity was everything I'd worked for: recognition, advancement, the chance to implement my ideas without filtration through others. Yet something felt wrong. "What's troubling you?" Julian asked, reading my hesitation. "Why not bring in someone you know? Someone you trust from your previous company?" Julian leaned back. "Because transforming company culture requires both outsider perspective and insider knowledge. I'm the outsider. I need a talented insider who recognizes the problems and hasn't been corrupted by them." He tapped the document. I'm offering you the position based on your work and your instincts. Your answer to my question yesterday told me everything I needed to know about your leadership potential. As I reached for the document, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, frowning. We'll have to continue this later. There's an urgent situation with the board. Is something wrong? Potentially. It seems there's been some resistance to my personnel decisions. Pierce has apparently been busy overnight. My moment of triumph evaporated. Of course, Pierce wouldn't surrender without a fight. He had years of connections, favors owed, dirt collected. Should I be worried? I asked. Julian stood, gathering his materials. Meet me in the main conference room in 30 minutes. And Reese, bring your complete Asia-Pacific files, everything you have. As I returned to my desk, a notification popped up on my computer. An emergency all-hands meeting scheduled for 9 a.m., called by the board chairman, not Julian. Moments later, Pierce walked past my desk with 2 board members, deep in conversation. He spotted me and smiled. Not a friendly smile, but the satisfied look of someone who had laid a trap and watched their prey walk right into it. My phone pinged with a message from Julian. Change of plans. Board meeting now. Bring files immediately. As I gathered my materials, another employee stopped by my desk. Have you heard? The board might be reversing Julian's appointment. Something about procedural violations in his hiring. The ground seemed to shift beneath my feet. Had I aligned myself with the wrong side? Had Pierce somehow orchestrated Julian's removal before my promotion could be formalized? With my files clutched against my chest, just like yesterday, but with entirely different stakes, I walked toward the boardroom, uncertainty clouding what had briefly seemed like a clear path to justice. The boardroom buzzed with tension when I arrived. Board members clustered in whispered conversations that abruptly ceased as I entered. Julian stood alone near the window, his posture relaxed despite the obvious hostility directed toward him. The board chairman, a silver-haired man named Garrett, occupied the head seat that Julian had claimed yesterday. Pierce sat 3 chairs from Garrett, looking simultaneously nervous and triumphant. When he caught my eye, he gave a small shrug as if to say, "You should have chosen differently." "Miss Palmer, thank you for joining us," Garrett said, his tone coolly professional. "Please, take a seat." I slid into an empty chair near the door, the furthest possible position from both Julian and Pierce. The symbolic distance wasn't lost on anyone. "Now that we're all present," Garrett continued, "let's address the concerning developments of the past 24 hours. It appears our new CEO has taken unusual interest in restructuring department leadership without proper consultation with this board." Julian didn't defend himself immediately, which surprised me. Instead, he watched the room with the calculated patience of someone waiting for opponents to reveal their strategy. "Additionally," Garrett added, "we've received troubling information about yesterday's incident. While innovation and fresh perspectives are valued, undermining established leadership structures creates organizational chaos." Pierce straightened in his chair. "If I may, sir, as the department head in question, I believe context would be helpful for everyone." Garrett nodded. "Please proceed." Pierce adopted an expression of reluctant duty. "I've mentored Reese for 2 years, nurturing her analytical talents while working to develop her understanding of strategic application. Yesterday's situation represented an unfortunate misunderstanding about project ownership. My fingers tightened around my portfolio. This reframing, casting himself as the supportive mentor and me as the misguided protege, was masterful manipulation. The Asia-Pacific strategy, Pierce continued, evolved through collaborative effort, with my team contributing various components under my direction. While Reese certainly provided valuable research elements, presenting her as the strategy's architect mischaracterizes the development process and undermines team hierarchy. Several board members nodded sympathetically. Pierce had clearly spent the night cultivating his narrative and supporters. Furthermore, he added, turning his gaze to Julian, Mr. Gray's interference created unnecessary tension within a high-functioning team. His suggestion of creating a new director position that circumvents established reporting structures seems hasty at best. Julian finally spoke. "Is that assessment unanimous among your team members, Pierce?" Pierce hesitated slightly. "My leadership approach has consistently delivered results this board has praised. My team understands the necessity of clear direction." "That wasn't my question," Julian replied mildly. "Team dynamics naturally include different perspectives," Pierce deflected. "Indeed they do," Julian agreed, pushing away from the window. "Which is why I spent last night speaking with members of your team. The subtle shift in atmosphere was almost imperceptible, but I felt it, like the barometric pressure drop before a storm. Julian approached the table. Interesting conversations, particularly with Alice from market research, Thomas from financial modeling, and Wei from regulatory compliance. All described remarkably similar experiences working under your leadership. Pierce's confident smile faltered. But we're not here to conduct a performance review, Julian continued. We're here because the board has concerns about my leadership decisions. Fair enough. Let's examine the evidence. He turned to me. Reese, the files, please. I handed him my portfolio, confused about his strategy but trusting it more than Pierce's obvious manipulations. Julian spread selected documents across the table. These are the original Asia-Pacific strategy components, with creation metadata and editing histories intact. Not the versions presented yesterday, but the source files. The board members leaned forward with newfound interest. You'll notice each document's properties, Julian continued. Creation dates, author information, revision histories, digital breadcrumbs that tell an interesting story. Pierce's complexion paled slightly. For instance, this market segmentation analysis. Julian selected a particular document, created by Reese Palmer 3 months ago, modified extensively last week by Pierce Harmon, with all author attributes changed to remove the original creator. Murmurs rippled through the room. Similar patterns appear across all core strategy documents, Julian added. Systematic removal of contribution credits, retroactive editing of creation dates, meticulously altered properties to obscure origins. Garrett cleared his throat. While concerning, document ownership disputes are hardly board-level matters. I agree completely, Julian replied smoothly, which is why I'm more interested in these. He produced another set of papers from his briefcase. Email exchanges between Pierce and representatives from CompetEdge Industries over the past 2 months. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. CompetEdge was our largest competitor. Pierce stood abruptly. Those are confidential communications taken out of context. Context is precisely what concerns me, Julian countered. Particularly the context of sharing proprietary strategy components, Reese's work, specifically, with a direct competitor while simultaneously burying her contributions internally. The board members exchanged alarmed glances. That's preposterous, Pierce sputtered. I would never. March 15th email. Julian cut him off. Attached preliminary findings on regulatory hurdles in Singapore market. Advance intel on approach allows positioning ahead of announcement. Sent from your personal email to CompetEdge's Vice President of Global Expansion. Garrett's expression hardened. Is this accurate, Pierce? It's a mischaracterization, Pierce insisted, though his voice had lost its conviction. Networking with industry colleagues is standard practice. Sharing confidential strategy with competitors is not, Julian replied, nor is suppressing innovative work to maintain personal position while simultaneously profiting from that same work externally. The revelation hit me like physical impact. Pierce hadn't just stolen my work for internal advancement, he'd been selling my insights to competitors. The betrayal cut deeper than I'd imagined possible. These are serious allegations, Garrett said, his previous alliance with Pierce visibly wavering. With substantial evidence, Julian added. Which brings me to why Miss Palmer's presence was necessary today. Not as an accused party, but as the primary victim of intellectual theft and corporate espionage. The focus of the room shifted to me. I felt dizzy with the sudden reversal. Anger, mixing with vindication. Julian continued. The Asia-Pacific strategy remains viable, with Reese's original components restored and Pierce's compromised modifications removed. Implementation should proceed under new leadership. Unquestionably Reese's, given her demonstrated expertise and proven loyalty to this company's interests. Garrett studied me with newfound consideration. Miss Palmer, were you aware of any of this? The credit theft, yes, I answered honestly. The external sharing, no. I would have reported that immediately, regardless of potential personal consequences. Pierce made one final desperate attempt. This is clearly orchestrated character assassination. I've served this company faithfully for 8 years. My record speaks for itself. It certainly does, Julian agreed, which is why I've also prepared a comprehensive audit of your previous innovative strategies for board review. Patterns emerge across years, not just months. The next hour unfolded with surgical precision as Julian methodically dismantled Pierce's professional facade. Board members transitioned from skepticism to shock to resolve. Pierce's allies distanced themselves with each new revelation. By meeting's end, Pierce sat alone, reputation in tatters, career imploding in real time. As the board called for a private deliberation, we were asked to step outside. In the hallway, Pierce grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my skin. "You planned this," he hissed. "You manipulated Julian, fed him information." I removed his hand calmly. "No, Pierce. You did this to yourself. I simply did my job exceptionally well. So well that your theft became obvious to anyone who looked closely enough." "This isn't over," he threatened, voice barely above a whisper. "Actually, it is," Julian interrupted, approaching from behind. "Security is waiting to escort you from the building. Company devices and access have been deactivated. Legal will contact you regarding confidentiality violations and potential litigation." As security led Pierce away, I felt strangely hollow. The victory tasted different than I'd imagined. Less sweet satisfaction, more somber resolution. Julian watched them disappear around the corner. Disappointing. I expected more dignity in defeat. "You knew about the CompEdge connection before yesterday," I realized suddenly. He nodded. "Board due diligence revealed irregularities in information security. Your situation provided the perfect lens to examine the broader problem." He studied my expression. "You're not celebrating." "I never wanted his destruction," I admitted. "Just recognition for my work." "You'll have that and more," Julian assured me. "Though it might interest you to know that Pierce's downfall wasn't my doing or yours. It was his assistant's." "His assistant?" I echoed, confused. "Amelia." After years of watching him steal others' work, she began documenting everything. When news of my appointment circulated, she approached me confidentially. Your situation merely confirmed what she'd already compiled. The quiet dignity of that revelation, someone who had witnessed injustice and methodically prepared for the moment when truth could prevail, struck me deeply. "The Strategic Innovation Director position is still yours if you want it," Julian said. "Though, after today's revelations, the board might approve something more substantial." 2 weeks later, I stood before the executive team again, this time as the newly appointed Executive Vice President of Global Strategy. The restructured organization chart displayed on the screen showed my position with clear lines of authority over departments that once viewed my contributions as mere support function. As I presented the revised Asia-Pacific strategy, now expanding to include additional markets identified through my research methodology, I noticed several former allies of Pierce paying particularly close attention. Not from fear or obligation, but with genuine engagement and respect. At the meeting's conclusion, I stopped by Amelia's desk. She'd been promoted to strategy coordinator, reporting directly to me. "The Singapore projections look excellent," I told her. "Your analysis of cultural adoption factors added significant depth." Her surprise at receiving direct credit made my heart ache with recognition. "Thank you for noticing," she said simply. "I always will," I promised. "Proper attribution matters on my team." That evening, as I packed up my belongings from my old desk for the move to my new office, corner view, executive furnishings, name on the door, I found a handwritten note from Julian. "True revenge isn't destruction. It's building something so extraordinary that those who dismissed you must acknowledge your excellence every day. You've achieved that not by tearing Pierce down, but by rising so high that his absence becomes irrelevant to your story. Well done. Wol, wol, wol." I tucked the note into my jacket pocket, reflecting on how differently things might have unfolded. In my darkest moments after Pierce's betrayal, I'd fantasized about exposing him, humiliating him, watching his career burn. But this, creating a team where ideas flourished regardless of title, where contribution earned recognition on merit alone, this was better. The true revenge wasn't Pierce's downfall. It was transforming the system that once enabled him into one where talent like mine, and Amelia's, and countless others, could no longer be silenced or stolen. If this story of corporate justice resonated with you, hit that subscribe button for more tales of determination and redemption. Drop a comment sharing your thoughts or experiences with workplace betrayal. Sometimes knowing we're not alone makes all the difference. And don't forget to like this video to help others find this story who might need to hear that patience, documentation, and excellence are sometimes the sweetest revenge of all. We need to discuss your position at the center, Avery. My boss wouldn't meet my eyes, his gaze fixed on the stack of papers before him. My wife has raised concerns about the direction of our Raptor rehabilitation program. Concerns? Our release rates are up 62% this year. We've saved species other centers couldn't. It's not about results. It's about approach. He cleared his throat. "Marissa feels you're too rigid with protocols." "Too." controlling over who interacts with the animals. You mean because I wouldn't let her pose with the injured hawk for social media? Or when I stopped her from feeding cake to the barred owl? She's made a substantial donation. The board feels she deserves more input. So, what exactly are you saying? The knot in my chest tightened. We're restructuring. You'll be handling basic care duties: cleaning, feeding. Marissa's cousin Jenny will take over the Raptor program. Jenny? She's been volunteering for 3 months. She doesn't know the first thing about that. The decision's final. He slid a paper across the desk. Your new salary and position. I need your signature. I stared at the paper, blood rushing in my ears. A 40% pay cut. 4 years of building this program from nothing, developing techniques that had saved countless birds of prey, all of it handed to someone whose qualification was being related to the woman who'd married wealth. What if I refuse? Then I'll accept your resignation, effective immediately. 2 weeks later, I watched helplessly as the golden eagle we'd spent months rehabilitating died under Jenny's care. She'd missed critical signs I would have caught instantly. As I stood over its magnificent body, something inside me broke, then hardened into resolve. I walked out that day, leaving behind everything I'd built. What I didn't know then was that I wasn't just walking away from a job. I was walking toward becoming someone that Marissa would one day regret crossing. If you're enjoying this story of betrayal and what comes next, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to hear how this unfolds. Trust me, what happens when she walks into my office thinking she's getting a job interview? Worth every second. My name is Avery Kincaid, and until that moment in my boss's office, I'd never considered myself particularly ambitious. Animals were my passion, not power. I'd grown up on the outskirts of Pinewood, a rural town surrounded by expansive forests and wetlands. As a child, I spent more time nursing injured sparrows back to health than playing with other kids. By 22, I'd earned my degree in wildlife biology and started as an entry-level caretaker at Wilderness Revival Center. Within 4 years, I'd developed such effective rehabilitation techniques for birds of prey that centers across the country began asking for my protocols. The director, Cameron, initially supported my work enthusiastically. We were making breakthroughs in raptor rehabilitation that were gaining national attention. The center's reputation soared, bringing in donations and grants. Then Marissa appeared at a fundraising gala. She wore a dress that cost more than my yearly salary and had the laugh of someone who'd never worried about paying rent. Cameron fell instantly, proposing after just 3 months. I was happy for him until she started showing up at the center, critiquing everything from our facilities to our methods. Wouldn't it be darling to have visitors bottle feed the fawns? She suggested one afternoon, ignoring my explanation about habituation risks. These animals aren't pets, I reminded her. Our goal is release, not socialization. Her smile remained, but her eyes changed. Of course, Avery, you're the expert. The trouble began in earnest after she contributed $200,000 with the stipulation that she would take an active role in center operations. Cameron was elated. The center needed the money. I tried to be accommodating, teaching her basics of wildlife care, but her interest wasn't in learning. It was in control. The incident with the red-tailed hawk became our breaking point. We'd spent weeks healing its fractured wing when Marissa brought friends to see her rehabilitation center. I want to hold it for a quick photo, she announced, reaching for the hawk's enclosure. I stepped between her and the cage. That's not possible. Stress could reverse weeks of progress. Don't be ridiculous. It'll only take a minute. No, I'm sorry, but absolutely not. Her smile disappeared. You work for this center. I fund this center. I work for these animals. 2 days later, I was demoted. The first month of cleaning cages instead of performing specialized care was humiliating. Staff who'd once sought my expertise now avoided eye contact. Jenny, with her 2-week crash course in raptor rehabilitation, began changing protocols I'd spent years developing. When the golden eagle died, I knew I couldn't stay. That night, I called Dr. Helen Lang, a veterinarian who'd referred injured wildlife to our center for years. I quit today, I told her, voice hollow. About time, she replied. Have you heard Elaine Parker is retiring next month? Selling her small rehab property out by Lakeside? Someone with your skills could transform that place. The idea planted itself like a seed. Could I? The property would need massive upgrades. I had some savings, but nowhere near enough. Yet the alternative, watching everything I'd built crumble under incompetent hands, was unbearable. 3 weeks later, I signed the papers on Elaine's 5-acre property, using every penny of my savings plus a small business loan. The facility was little more than an outdated house with a barn and some makeshift enclosures. The first night, I slept on the floor of what would become my office, surrounded by boxes of supplies and equipment I'd purchased secondhand. Morning revealed the enormity of what I'd undertaken. The enclosures needed rebuilding. The treatment room was decades out of date, and I was alone, without staff, regular funding, or even proper running water in the barn. I woke before dawn and worked until I couldn't stand. Every enclosure I rebuilt, every wall I painted, every protocol I wrote, I did it with Marissa's dismissive smile burned into my memory. 3 months in, living on instant noodles and determination, I got my first significant case, a bald eagle with lead poisoning, brought in by a park ranger who'd heard I worked miracles with raptors. The truth was less magical, just specialized knowledge and obsessive attention to detail. Wilderness Revival couldn't take it? I asked as we transferred the magnificent bird to a treatment space. They've had some problems recently, he replied carefully. State inspection found some concerns. Your name came up from several wildlife officers. I said nothing, but inside, a small flame of vindication flickered. The eagle survived, against odds. A local wildlife photographer documented its recovery and release, images that traveled far beyond our rural community. A small conservation magazine ran a feature on my innovative habitat-specific recovery spaces. Donations began trickling in, not Marissa-level money, but enough to hire an assistant, then a part-time veterinary technician. By month 6, we'd become the primary wildlife rehabilitation center for 3 counties. I hired a coordinator to handle incoming calls and paperwork. We weren't just surviving, we were thriving. That's when the email arrived. Avery, we have an interesting application, my coordinator said, stepping into my office. Someone with extensive wildlife center experience according to her resume. Marissa Peterson? I froze, staring at the printed resume she held out. There, in elegant typography, was the name of the woman who'd destroyed everything I'd built. The woman who'd had me demoted because I wouldn't let her endanger animals for social media content. Says here she was the Associate Director of Rehabilitation Programs at Wilderness Revival. My coordinator raised an eyebrow. Wasn't that your old place? I took the resume, scanning its contents with growing disbelief. According to this document, Marissa had overseen rehabilitation protocols, managed staff, and developed community education programs. Reality couldn't have been further from this fiction. What's the position she's applying for? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Operations Manager. We did post that opening last week. The position would report directly to me, overseeing daily functions of the center. The perfect role for someone with actual experience, not someone who'd invented a fantasy career on paper. Why would she apply here? I murmured, more to myself than my coordinator. She must not know I own this place. Want me to reject it? We have other qualified candidates. So, I stared at the phone number on the resume, memories flooding back, the golden eagle that died needlessly, the humiliation of cleaning cages after years of specialized work, the nights spent sleeping on the floor of this very building while trying to create something new from nothing. A plan began forming in my mind. No, I said finally. Schedule an interview, but don't tell her who she'll be meeting with. My coordinator raised an eyebrow. You sure? Based on your reaction, there seems to be history there. History is putting it mildly, I said, handing back the resume. Schedule her for tomorrow afternoon if possible, and let's keep my ownership unlisted in any correspondence. That night, I barely slept. My mind raced with questions. What had happened at Wilderness Revival since I'd left? Why would Marissa, a woman who'd used her husband's position and her own wealth to demote me, suddenly need employment? And at my center of all places, the ranger's comment about problems at my former workplace took on new significance. I'd been so focused on building my own center that I'd paid little attention to news about Wilderness Revival. A quick online search revealed concerning headlines: local wildlife center under investigation, state authorities question care standards at rehabilitation facility. I dug deeper, finding an article from just 3 weeks prior. Wilderness Revival Center director steps down amid controversy. There was Cameron's photo, looking haggard as he left the building. The article mentioned financial irregularities and substandard care protocols resulting in preventable animal deaths. No specific mention of Marissa, but reading between the lines, it wasn't hard to guess what had happened. They'd lost their funding. The center that had once been the crown jewel of regional wildlife rehabilitation was collapsing. And now Marissa, who'd never worked a day in wildlife care despite what her resume claimed, was desperate enough to apply at a small, rural facility she'd never heard of. The next morning, I dressed with unusual care. Not formally, we were a wildlife center, after all, but I chose my most professional field clothes and the jacket I reserved for donor meetings. My staff noticed. "Special visitor today?" asked Talia, my rehabilitation assistant, as she prepared medications for our current patients. "You could say that," I replied, checking my watch. 2 hours until the interview. I spent those hours in a strange state of anticipation, walking the grounds of what we now called Second Chance Wildlife Center. What had started as a rundown property was now something I felt genuine pride in. Our enclosures were thoughtfully designed for each species' recovery needs. The medical treatment room contained equipment I'd only dreamed of having at Wilderness Revival. We'd recently completed construction on specialized aquatic rehabilitation tanks for water birds. Everything here I'd built from nothing. After being stripped of my position and program at Wilderness Revival, I'd created something better. The knowledge gave me a steadiness I hadn't expected to feel. At precisely 2 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from our front desk. "Your appointment has arrived." I settled behind my desk, a simple but sturdy oak piece I'd refinished myself during those early sleepless nights, and nodded to my coordinator. "Send her in." The door opened, and there she was. Marissa Peterson looked different than when I'd last seen her. The designer clothes had been replaced with a reasonable but clearly new outfit purchased for interviews. Her usually perfect hair showed signs of more economical styling. But her expression, that was entirely new. Gone was the smug superiority, replaced with the tight smile of someone trying desperately to appear confident while feeling anything but. That expression shifted to shock the moment she saw me. "Avery?" She stopped mid-step, one foot literally hovering above the floor. "I didn't realize this was your place. Please, have a seat," I said, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. Professional, calm, nothing in my tone betrayed the complex emotions churning beneath. She hesitated, then slowly lowered herself into the chair, hands clutched tightly around her designer purse. "Likely a remnant from better days. Your resume claims extensive experience in wildlife rehabilitation management," I said, glancing down at the paper before me. "Tell me about that." She straightened, falling back on practiced poise. "Yes, well, at Wilderness Revival, I oversaw the rehabilitation programs, developing care protocols and managing staff schedules." "Interesting," I said, letting the word hang between us. "Which specific rehabilitation techniques did you implement for avian botulism cases?" Her eyes widened slightly. I delegated those technical decisions to staff with specialized training. And what's your approach to treating lead poisoning in bald eagles?" "That would depend on the severity of the case." She shifted in her seat. "What severity markers would you look for specifically?" She swallowed. "I'd consult with the veterinarian on the appropriate treatment path." For 15 excruciating minutes, I asked pointed technical questions that anyone with actual wildlife rehabilitation experience could answer. With each vague response, her composure cracked further. "What would you do?" I asked finally, "if a staff member disagreed with your approach to treating an injured animal?" "I would remind them who's in charge," she replied, a flash of the old Marissa emerging. "That's not the correct answer when someone else might have expertise you lack," I said evenly. She looked away, her facade crumbling entirely. "The center is failing," she admitted quietly. "Everyone says it's because you left. We've been blacklisted by several conservation groups." "What happened?" I asked, genuine curiosity mixing with my other emotions. "After you left, things fell apart slowly at first. The raptor program. Jenny couldn't handle it. More birds died. Then the deer began showing signs of stress-related illnesses. The state inspection found multiple violations. And Cameron?" Her shoulders sagged. "He tried to fix things, but our major donors pulled out after the inspection report went public. We invested our personal savings trying to keep it afloat, but," she gestured helplessly, "he resigned last month. We're selling our house." I let this sink in. The center that had pushed me out was collapsing. The couple who'd demoted me were facing financial ruin. The revenge fantasy I might have harbored 6 months ago had manifested without my lifting a finger. "We need someone for basic facility maintenance and food preparation," I said after a long pause. "Minimum wage, weekend shifts. You would report to my rehabilitation assistant, Talia, who's 20 years younger than you but has been rehabilitating wildlife since high school." Her face flushed deep red. "That's absurd. I have administrative experience. In fundraising, perhaps, but our reputation is built on proper animal care, which begins with understanding every aspect, including the parts that aren't Instagram-worthy." She stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "I don't need this. I didn't know this was your center, or I never would have applied. Why did you claim to have done my job on your resume?" She froze, hand on the doorknob. "I needed work. Cameron's reputation is ruined in the conservation community. My family won't help us. They never approved of him anyway. Do you have any idea what it's like to lose everything overnight?" The irony of her question hung in the air between us. "Actually," I said quietly, "I do." She left without another word. That evening, as I made my rounds checking on our patients, I felt strangely hollow. The confrontation I'd anticipated for months hadn't brought the satisfaction I'd expected. Seeing Marissa humbled should have felt like victory. Instead, it left me contemplating the thin line between justice and vengeance. 3 days later, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Is this Avery Kincaid?" a man's voice asked when I answered. "Speaking. This is Robert Winters, board chairman at Wilderness Revival Center." He cleared his throat uncomfortably. "I'm calling because we're in a difficult position. Our center is at risk of permanent closure following recent challenges." "I'm aware of the situation," I replied neutrally. "Yes, well, your name has come up repeatedly as we've consulted with wildlife authorities about how to address our problems. Your rehabilitation techniques, particularly for raptors, were apparently exceptional." I said nothing, waiting. "The board has removed Cameron Peterson as director, and we're seeking new leadership, someone with proven expertise and integrity. We'd like to discuss the possibility of you returning as director." My heart pounded in my chest. The position I'd never even dared dream of before my demotion was now being offered outright. Running Wilderness Revival would mean a larger facility, more resources, greater impact for the animals I cared about. "What about the financial situation?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "We've secured temporary emergency funding from the State Conservation Department, conditional upon new leadership and proven rehabilitation protocols." "Your protocols, specifically." I thought of my small center, the struggles, the late nights, the pride of building something from nothing. Then I thought of Wilderness Revival's resources, the good that could be done there under proper leadership. "I'd need to consider it carefully," I said. "My current center." "Of course," he interrupted. "Take the weekend, but we need an answer by Monday if we're going to save the center." After ending the call, I sat in silence, watching through my office window as a rehabilitated Cooper's hawk tested its wings in our largest flight enclosure. Tomorrow, it would be released back into the wild, another success story. The offer churned in my mind as I completed my evening rounds, returned to Wilderness Revival as director, the ultimate professional vindication, everything I'd worked toward before Marissa entered the picture. As I checked on our newest patient, a young bobcat hit by a car, my phone buzzed with a text message. "Cameron, heard the board reached out. Please consider their offer. I know I don't deserve your help after what happened, but the animals do. And Marissa is no longer involved, I promise." I slipped the phone back into my pocket without responding, my thoughts in turmoil. The decision ahead felt weighted with implications beyond my professional future. It was about who I wanted to be, someone defined by past injuries, or someone defined by moving forward. The next morning, I arrived early at Second Chance. The sun was just cresting the tree line, casting long shadows across our carefully constructed enclosures. In the quiet morning light, I walked the grounds, mentally cataloging everything we'd built in 6 short months. My phone rang again. Robert Winters. Apparently, he couldn't wait until Monday. "Miss Kincaid, I apologize for calling on the weekend, but there's been a development. The state inspection team is giving us one final opportunity to demonstrate viability before they permanently revoke our rehabilitation license. They're visiting Wednesday." "That's very soon," I replied. "Yes, which is why we need your answer today. If you accept the director position, they'll take that into consideration. Your reputation carries significant weight." The pressure of the decision pressed down on me. Walking back to my office, I passed Talia, treating a barred owl we'd admitted yesterday. "Morning, boss," she called cheerfully, his wings looking better already. I paused, watching her gentle, competent movements. 6 months ago, she'd been a talented but inexperienced volunteer. Now she could handle complex cases independently. I'd built not just a facility, but a team. As I continued toward my office, my coordinator waved me over to her desk. The family who brought in that fawn last month stopped by. They left this. She handed me a child's drawing of a deer with the wobbly handwritten words, "Thank you for saving her." I pinned the drawing to our already crowded bulletin board of similar tokens, tangible reminders of the community we'd built around Second Chance. Sitting at my desk, I stared at my phone, Cameron's text still unanswered, Robert Winters awaiting my call. The decision before me wasn't simply about career advancement or vindication. It was about what truly mattered to me and to the animals we served. I picked up the phone and dialed. "Mr. Winters, I've made my decision. I appreciate the offer," I told Mr. Winters, "but I'm declining the director position." Silence stretched across the line before he responded. "I don't understand. This is an extraordinary opportunity, the very center where you built your reputation. A center that chose to dismantle my program and demote me when it became inconvenient." I replied, surprised by the calm in my voice. "I've built something here that matters to me. We can match whatever salary you're making. Exceed it, likely. It's not about money. Then what is it about? Spite? Revenge against Cameron and Marissa? They're no longer involved. It's about integrity," I interrupted. "When animals were being mistreated, your board did nothing. When experienced staff raised concerns, you sided with donors over expertise. Why would I leave a center I built on proper principles to rescue one that abandoned them? Without your help, Wilderness Revival will close permanently." I paused, considering his words. The center's closure would mean dozens of animals in the region would have nowhere to go for rehabilitation. Despite everything, I couldn't let that happen. "I won't take the director position," I said finally, "but I have a counter-proposal. Second Chance Wildlife can absorb Wilderness Revival's rehabilitation program." "Absorb? I don't follow. We take over operations of your facility as a satellite location of Second Chance. Your board provides the property and remaining assets. We provide the expertise and management. Your center keeps its name for continuity with donors, but comes under our operational umbrella. That's unconventional. So is watching a once-respected wildlife center collapse because of poor management decisions. This preserves rehabilitation services in your area while ensuring proper protocols are followed. The board would need to vote. They have until Monday. After that, my offer expires." After ending the call, I sat back in my chair, heart racing despite my outwardly calm demeanor. Had I just turned down the position I'd once dreamed of? Yes. Had I then proposed essentially taking over the center that had pushed me out? Also, yes. My phone buzzed with a text from Cameron. The board chairman called me. "Is your counter-offer serious?" I replied simply, "Entirely." Throughout the weekend, I distracted myself with work, treating patients, revising care protocols, training volunteers. By Sunday evening, I'd nearly convinced myself the board would reject my proposal. Why would they hand operational control to the person they'd once demoted? Monday morning, my phone rang as I was examining a recovering red fox. "The board voted unanimously to accept your proposal," Robert Winters announced without preamble. "We're prepared to draw up the necessary legal agreements immediately." Within 2 weeks, Second Chance Wildlife Center had officially expanded to include what was now called Wilderness Revival Campus. I appointed Talia as the on-site manager, implementing our care protocols while I split my time between locations. We retained most of the staff, but instituted mandatory retraining in proper rehabilitation techniques. Word spread quickly through the wildlife conservation community. Rehabilitation centers in neighboring states reached out for guidance on our protocols. Grant applications that had been rejected when Wilderness Revival was under investigation were now approved with our management team listed. 3 months after the merger, I arrived at the Wilderness Revival campus for a routine visit. The transformation was remarkable. Animals receiving proper care, staff working with renewed purpose, volunteers eager to learn correct techniques. As I walked the grounds, I passed Cameron's former office, now converted to additional treatment space. "Avery?" a voice called from behind me. I turned to find Cameron standing awkwardly by the entrance. He looked thinner, his normally impeccable clothes slightly worn. Cameron, I didn't know you were visiting today. I'm not, officially. He gestured vaguely. I wanted to see how things were going. Things are going well. The rehabilitation program is back on track. He nodded, looking around at the center he'd once directed. The board told me about your management. Everyone says you've accomplished in 3 months what should have taken a year. We had a solid foundation to build on, I said diplomatically. Your staff just needed proper guidance. And Marissa's involvement was the problem. He stated it plainly, not as a question. I said nothing, letting the silence speak for itself. She's moving back east, he continued after a moment, living with her parents while the divorce finalizes. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? He gave a bitter laugh. After what she did to you? Marriage's ending is never something to celebrate, regardless of circumstances. He studied me, confusion evident in his expression. You could have demanded my permanent removal from the center as part of your takeover. You could have publicized what happened, how we treated you. Instead, I hear you've listed me as a founding contributor in grant applications. Revenge wasn't my goal, Cameron. Then what was? I considered his question carefully. Creating something that works, something that serves these animals properly, something built on expertise rather than ego. He looked away, unable to hold my gaze. The board mentioned you might consider bringing me back in a limited advisory capacity. Is that true? Yes. Your knowledge of the center's history and donor relationships could be valuable, as long as you understand that rehabilitation decisions stay with those qualified to make them. I understand, he hesitated. Thank you, Avery. Not many people would offer a second chance after what happened. I smiled slightly at his unintentional echo of my center's name. Second chances are literally what we do here. After he left, I continued my rounds, checking on each patient with the thoroughness that had become our trademark. In the raptor section, I paused before an enclosure housing a red-tailed hawk, the same species Marissa had once wanted to use as a photo prop. This particular hawk had been rescued after a territorial dispute with another raptor left it with a damaged wing. Initial assessments suggested it might never fly again, but under our care, it had defied expectations. Tomorrow, it would be released back into the wild, another success story that would have been impossible under the previous management. As I made notes on its final assessment, my phone buzzed with a news alert. Local Wildlife Center gains national recognition for innovative rehabilitation techniques. The article highlighted Second Chance's expansion and our dramatic improvement of the struggling wilderness revival facility. 6 months ago, I'd slept on a cot in an unheated office, wondering if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. Now I headed a thriving 2-campus wildlife rehabilitation organization that was setting standards across the state. The following week, I received an unexpected email from Marissa's lawyer, requesting permission to retrieve personal items she'd left at Wilderness Revival. I approved it without hesitation, instructing staff to provide whatever assistance she needed. On the designated day, I happened to be on site when she arrived. She stopped short upon seeing me, the confident facade completely gone. I didn't expect you to be here, she said quietly. Just checking on some patients, I replied. Staff will help you find your belongings. She nodded, then hesitated. I heard what you've done with the place. The rehabilitation statistics are impressive. That's what happens when animal welfare drives decisions. She looked around at the bustling center, and staff moving purposefully. Volunteers engaged in meaningful work, animals receiving proper care. You've built something remarkable, she admitted. Something I never could have. It wasn't about competing with you, Marissa. Wasn't it, even a little? A ghost of her former sharpness surfaced. You must have felt some satisfaction taking over the center after what happened. I considered her question honestly. The satisfaction comes from seeing these animals thrive, from knowing our work matters. That's a kind of success money can't buy and social status can't provide. She absorbed this, something shifting in her expression. I never understood what made you different. Why everyone respected you despite your lack of connections. It was never about me, I said simply. It was always about them. I gestured toward the recovery enclosures visible through the window. After collecting her things, Marissa paused at the door. What you've created here, it's what the center always should have been. As she walked away, I realized the true nature of my revenge wasn't in her humiliation or in taking over the center that had pushed me out. It was in building something so undeniably excellent that even those who had undervalued me were forced to recognize what they'd thrown away. 1 year to the day after my demotion, I stood watching as we released a bald eagle, our 100th successful raptor rehabilitation since the merger. As it soared into the open sky, wings strong and sure, I felt a sense of completion that no corner office or prestigious title could have provided. The ultimate revenge wasn't in tearing down what had hurt me. It was in rising so far above it that looking back no longer held any power. If you've been moved by Avery's journey from betrayal to triumph, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe for more stories of resilience and unexpected justice. Share in the comments what you would have done in Avery's position. Would you have taken over the center that pushed you out or built something entirely new? Your experiences with workplace betrayal might help others facing similar challenges find their own path forward. The glass award for my drought-resistant garden design glinted in the sunlight streaming through the window as Bryce announced his nephew would take the design director position. My third rejection in 3 years. Sweat beaded along my hairline, not from the greenhouse heat, but from the volcanic rage threatening to erupt beneath my composed expression. Pierce has impressive credentials from his time at the University of Colorado, Bryce continued, avoiding my eyes. I gripped my soil-stained hands behind my back, knuckles whitening. Pierce sat smugly at the opposite end of the workbench, his pressed chinos still department store crisp, hands too clean to have touched actual soil in months. Yesterday, Mrs. Abernathy had stopped me in the parking lot to gush about how my native plant installation had attracted monarch butterflies for the first time in 20 years. Last week, the local news featured my water conservation garden design. 3 days ago, Bryce himself had mentioned my weekend workshops were bringing in record revenue. But there sat Pierce, 26 years old and primarily qualified by DNA. Merritt will continue leading our sustainability initiatives, Bryce added, throwing me the same bone he'd tossed after each previous rejection. My carefully curated smile didn't waver, though something vital inside me cracked. A sympathetic glance from Deb across the workbench almost undid me. I didn't need pity. I needed what I'd earned. The meeting concluded. Everyone scattered faster than birds when a hawk circles. Only Tori lingered, her mouth opening as if to offer comfort, then closing when she caught my expression. I stayed rooted until everyone departed, then walked with deliberate steps toward Bryce's office. Through the glass partition, I watched him hurriedly gather his things. My hand pushed the door open before he could escape. Why? The single word came out steadier than I felt. Bryce busied himself with papers. Pierce brings fresh perspective. His thesis on ornamental grasses was quite, I've generated more revenue for this garden center in 3 years than anyone in its history. My client waitlist is 4 months long. The Water Authority literally sends people here specifically requesting my designs. This isn't personal, Merritt. Tell me what more I could have done. His hesitation spoke volumes. Your approach is unconventional. Clients want reliability, not experiments. Experiments? The word tasted bitter. My designs save clients thousands in water bills and maintenance costs. They're not experimental, they're the future. Not everyone wants the future, Merritt. Some people prefer tradition. Tradition. Code for the chemical-heavy, water-wasting gardens that had been Pinewood Garden Center's bread and butter before I arrived. Gardens that generated ongoing maintenance contracts and repeated chemical sales. This is the 3rd time, Bryce. He finally looked at me, discomfort mixed with resolution. Perhaps your talents would be better appreciated elsewhere. The dismissal was clear. After 3 years, he was suggesting I leave rather than recognize my contributions. As I turned to go, I noticed Pierce peering through the office blinds, already measuring for new furniture. I walked out to my demonstration garden, relegated to the far corner of the nursery 3 seasons ago, and sat among the black-eyed Susans and purple coneflowers buzzing with bees. The native plant section I'd built from nothing had become the garden center's quirky corner, as Bryce called it. Never mind that this quirky corner had been featured in Gardening Monthly or that customers specifically came asking for that eco-garden lady. My phone buzzed with a calendar notification. The Governor's Mansion Landscape Initiative deadline was tomorrow. I'd nearly finished my design, but had hesitated to submit it. What was the point of another rejection? I plucked a spent bloom, rolling the stem between my fingers. 3 years of pushing against resistance had drained me. 3 years of watching my innovations attributed to others during client presentations. 3 years of being too ambitious, too vocal, too everything that threatened the comfortable order. Had this all been inevitable? From my first day, when I suggested replacing the chemical fertilizer display with organic alternatives, and Bryce laughed, calling me our little tree hugger? Or was it when my first drought-resistant installation for the public library received newspaper coverage, and suddenly my design folders began disappearing from the shared drive? The signs were everywhere if I had been willing to read them. The way certain clients were steered away from my consultation table, how Pierce or Truman would insert themselves into meetings with my high-profile clients, the mysterious rescheduling of my workshops to conflict with important garden shows. Merit? Deb approached cautiously, extending a cup of tea. You okay? Spectacular, I replied, accepting the cup. It's wrong. Everyone knows it. Yet no one says anything. Deb sighed. What can we do? Bryce owns the place. That was the truth that had kept me in check for 3 years. Bryce Pinewood was the third-generation owner of the largest garden center in the county. His word was final. I thought good work would be enough, I said quietly. It should be. We sat in silence until a customer approached, asking about butterfly plants. I stood automatically, professional smile in place, and began explaining the merits of milkweed. This was what I did. Educate, innovate, persevere. But for what? After closing, I lingered in the greenhouse, misting the seedlings I'd been nurturing for spring. Native columbines and salvias that most suppliers didn't bother with because they weren't showy enough for conventional gardens. My quiet rebellion. Still here? Pierce's voice startled me. He leaned against the doorframe, key ring twirling around his finger. Just finishing up. You know, I've always admired your passion. The pause suggested otherwise. Must be difficult, caring so much about plants that most people consider weeds. I continued misting. Native plants are the backbone of our ecosystem. Without them, save the lecture. I just wanted to say I hope there are no hard feelings about today. Uncle Bryce makes the decisions, and well, family is family. The spray bottle paused in my hand. Is that why you got the job? Family? His laugh held no humor. I got it because I understand what customers actually want, not what you think they should want. They want pretty gardens that impress neighbors, not science projects. My designs aren't. Look, Merritt, you're talented. Nobody denies that. But you're pushing too hard against tradition. This business ran successfully for 50 years before you arrived with your sustainability crusade, and it will fail in the next 20 if it doesn't adapt. Water restrictions are getting tighter every year. Chemical runoff regulations are coming. The future is sustainable gardening. Pierce sighed dramatically. This is exactly why Uncle Bryce couldn't promote you. You think you know better than everyone else. That kind of attitude disrupts a team. The truth hit like a thunderclap. It wasn't my designs they objected to. It was the threat those designs posed to their business model. Sustainable gardens needed fewer chemicals, less frequent maintenance, reduced water systems. My success threatened their profit streams. I get it now, I whispered. Good. So we can work together without tension. Pierce stepped closer. Actually, I'd appreciate your help with the West Side Municipal Project. Your plant knowledge would be useful, and I could put your name in the secondary credits. Secondary credits. After I'd written the initial proposal that won the bid. I'll think about it, I lied. After he left, I sat among the seedlings and made a decision. Opening my laptop, I pulled up the nearly completed design for the Governor's Mansion initiative. The submission guidelines specified anonymous entries, no names, no company affiliations, just designs judged on merit alone. For 3 hours, I refined every detail of my vision. Rainwater capture systems feeding native plant communities, pollinator corridors connecting discrete garden rooms, edible landscaping disguised as ornamental borders. Everything I believed in, everything I'd been told was too experimental, too ambitious, too much. If you're listening to this story and know what it's like to have your light dimmed by others, tap that like button. If you've ever had your ideas dismissed only to watch someone else take credit later, subscribe to hear more stories that might just give you the courage to shine anyway. I'd love to read your experiences in the comments. My name is Merritt Bloom, and gardening isn't just my profession, it's my language. Where others see empty spaces, I envision ecosystems. While classmates planned wedding dresses, I sketched native plant combinations that would support local bird populations. My parents hoped I'd grow out of spending every free moment volunteering at community gardens, but instead, I grew into someone who could identify 50 wildflower species before I could legally drive. I arrived at Pinewood Garden Center with a master's degree in sustainable landscape design and naive enthusiasm. Bryce hired me during a market downturn when traditional landscaping contracts had slowed. My pitch was simple. Eco-friendly designs could open new client demographics and prepare the business for increasingly strict water regulations. "We'll give your ideas a trial run," he'd said, "but our bread and butter is still traditional landscaping." That trial run turned into a waiting list of clients specifically requesting sustainable designs. What began as a curiosity became a significant revenue stream, one that Bryce acknowledged but never fully embraced. The existing design team watched my rise with growing unease. Truman Hansen, senior designer for 20 years, specialized in formal English gardens that required weekly maintenance and regular chemical treatments. Lucinda Wells created elaborate water features that, while beautiful, wasted thousands of gallons annually. Pierce, before his convenient promotion, mainly designed decorative borders featuring non-native annuals requiring replacement each season. My success threatened their expertise. Every water-efficient garden I installed meant fewer maintenance contracts. Every native plant garden reduced chemical sales. My workshops teaching homeowners to maintain their own eco-gardens undercut the center's service department. The resistance began subtly. Plants I'd specified for client installations would mysteriously be out of stock, forcing last-minute substitutions that compromised my designs. My demonstration garden was relocated 3 times, each move placing it further from customer traffic. Workshop materials would disappear hours before classes began. "Must have been a misunderstanding," Bryce would say when I raised concerns. Then came the client interference. Deb overheard Truman telling the Hendersons that my native plant design would attract pests and look weedy by August. When the Riverdale Community Center requested my drought-resistant design, Lucinda warned them it would appear brown and dead during summer months, despite my portfolio showing vibrant summer gardens using appropriate native species. Still, I persisted. I arrived early to propagate hard-to-find native plants myself. I created detailed maintenance guides for clients. I documented the water savings and biodiversity increases in my installed gardens. I built a loyal client base that specifically requested my services. But watching that third promotion go to Pierce, who once planted shade-loving hostas in full southwestern exposure, nearly broke me. 3 years of innovation, growth, and proven success counted less than familiar DNA. That night, after submitting my design to the Governor's Mansion Initiative, I sat on my apartment balcony, surrounded by rare seedlings I'd rescued from development sites. Native plants most people would never notice, yet each vital to some pollinator, bird, or soil microbe. Much like my contributions at work, essential but unrecognized by those in power. My phone pinged with a text from Deb. "Emergency planning meeting tomorrow. New chemical supplier presentation. Mandatory attendance." Another subtle message. The company was doubling down on traditional methods. My innovations would remain contained to my quirky corner. I watered my seedlings and made a decision. Whether or not my Governor's Mansion design won, it was time to plan my exit. 3 years of pushing against resistance had proven that Pinewood wouldn't change from within. Sleep came fitfully that night, my dreams filled with gardens that kept transforming into concrete whenever I turned my back. I woke exhausted but resolute. Today would be different. Today, I would begin looking toward my future, instead of fighting for recognition of my past. The mandatory meeting featured a representative from Chemgrow Industries, showcasing their new and improved line of pesticides and fertilizers. I sat silently while Bryce and the others nodded approvingly at promises of greener lawns with half the effort and complete pest elimination guaranteed. When the representative asked for questions, my hand rose before I could reconsider. "Have you conducted studies on how these chemicals affect pollinator populations?" The question landed like a stone in still water. The representative's smile flickered. "Our products are EPA approved for residential use. That wasn't my question. Do you have data on pollinator impact, soil microbiome effects, groundwater testing results?" Bryce cleared his throat. "Perhaps we can discuss those technical details after the presentation, Merritt." "These aren't technical details. They're fundamental considerations for any garden center claiming to care about environmental stewardship." The silence stretched uncomfortably until the representative launched into rehearsed talking points about balancing effectiveness with responsibility. I didn't push further. My point was made, though likely ignored. After the meeting, Bryce cornered me by the tool shed. That was inappropriate, Merritt. Asking about environmental impacts of products we sell is inappropriate. The manner in which you challenged our guest was unprofessional. I asked legitimate questions that any responsible garden center should consider. His jaw tightened. We've tolerated your perspective because it attracts a certain customer demographic, but don't mistake that for company policy. Pinewood has relationships with suppliers that predate your employment and will continue long after. The implied threat hung between us. I nodded once and walked away, his words echoing. After, he was already envisioning Pinewood without me. That afternoon, while helping a customer select plants for a butterfly garden, I noticed Pierce leading my consultation with the West Side Municipal Project team. The project I'd written the proposal for, the project that should have been mine. I watched from behind a display of ornamental grasses as Pierce gestured with my proposal in his hands, pointing to design elements I'd spent weekends perfecting. The municipal team nodded appreciatively while Pierce explained his vision for transforming the public space into a sustainable showcase. We'll incorporate native plant communities that reduce water usage by 60%, he said, using my exact words from the document. The project director smiled. That's exactly what we're looking for. The water conservation angle will help us secure additional funding. My hands trembled as I gripped a pot of switchgrass. Pierce hadn't just been given my promotion. He was now being handed my work, my ideas, my passion projects. The realization settled like a stone in my chest. This had been happening longer than I knew. That evening, I stayed late, using the office computer to search through old project files. There it was, evidence of my systematic erasure. My detailed plant lists for the library renovation, now under Truman's name. My rainwater capture system for the elementary school, credited to Lucinda. 3 years of innovation, appropriated and reassigned. I downloaded copies to my personal email, hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. Not revenge, I told myself. Documentation. The greenhouse door squeaked open behind me. Working late again? Deb asked, setting down her purse. I forgot my keys. I closed the browser, just checking some plant availability. It is my 40, she hesitated. I heard about the municipal project. Pierce is presenting your proposal. Apparently. It's not right, Merritt. None of this is right, but it's how things work here. I powered down the computer. I'm beginning to understand that. Deb leaned against the counter. What will you do? Deb, the question hung between us. What could I do? Leave and start over somewhere else, where the same dynamics might play out again. Stay and continue watching my work benefit others? I'm considering my options, I said finally. 2 days later, the first anonymous finalist selections for the Governor's Mansion Initiative were announced. 10 designs had been chosen for further consideration, identified only by submission numbers. Design 347, submission, was among them. I kept the news to myself, a private victory in a week of public defeats. The anonymity of the contest meant my work would be judged solely on merit, not on office politics or personal connections. That afternoon, Bryce called an unexpected staff meeting. Everyone gathered in the main showroom, curiosity buzzing. Bryce stood beside a distinguished-looking woman I didn't recognize. This is Amara Reed, Director of the State Environmental Commission, Bryce announced, his voice unusually formal. She's here about an exciting opportunity for Pinewood. Amara stepped forward. Thank you for your time. As you may know, the Governor's Mansion is undergoing a complete landscape renovation, focusing on sustainability and native ecology. The initiative committee has selected 10 finalist designs, and we're visiting potential contractor firms to discuss implementation capabilities. My pulse quickened. They were considering Pinewood to implement one of the finalist designs, possibly mine. This is a prestigious project that would put the selected firm at the forefront of sustainable landscaping in our state, Imara continued. The governor is personally committed to making the mansion grounds a showcase for water conservation and habitat restoration. Bryce beamed. Pinewood Garden Center has been a leader in landscape design for over 50 years. We'd be honored to be considered. Excellent. Imara smiled. Now, I'd like to meet your sustainable landscape specialists. Who heads your eco-friendly design department? The room fell silent. Bryce's smile faltered as he glanced around, eventually looking at me. Merritt handles most of our sustainability initiatives, he said reluctantly. Perfect. I'd love to see your demonstration gardens and discuss your approach to native plant communities. I felt every eye in the room on me as I stepped forward. I'd be happy to show you our sustainable design area. As we walked toward my demonstration garden, Bryce and Pierce hurried to join us. Imara spoke directly to me. The committee was particularly impressed with finalist design 347, she said. The integration of rainwater management with pollinator corridors showed exceptional understanding of ecological principles. My heart pounded. She was describing my design. That sounds innovative, I replied carefully. It is. In fact, it's precisely the approach the governor hopes to implement. Does your team use similar techniques in your commercial designs? Before I could answer, Pierce stepped in. Absolutely. Our designs frequently incorporate those principles. I recently completed a municipal project using that exact approach. I bit my tongue as Pierce described his water conservation techniques, all taken directly from my proposal. Bryce nodded along, adding comments about Pinewood's commitment to sustainability. Imara listened politely, then turned back to me. And what's your perspective, Merritt? As the sustainability specialist, do you find your innovative approaches are well supported here? The question hung in the air like summer humidity before a storm. Bryce and Pierce watched me, tension visible in their postures. 3 years of diminishment, credit stealing, and rejection flashed through my mind. I believe in Pinewood's potential to lead in sustainable landscaping, I said carefully. My demonstration garden showcases what's possible when we prioritize ecological principles. We reached the native plant section, my section, tucked in the furthest corner of the nursery. Despite its location, the garden hummed with life. Bumblebees bounced between coneflowers, goldfinches plucked seeds from native grasses, and a monarch butterfly drifted lazily over the milkweed. You created this? Imara asked, watching a hummingbird dart between cardinal flowers. Yes. It demonstrates how native plants can create functioning ecosystems even in small spaces. She nodded appreciatively. It's remarkable how much biodiversity you've attracted. Exactly the approach the governor envisions. Pierce stepped forward. Merritt has been a valuable team member, but our comprehensive approach includes both traditional and sustainable methods. I'd be happy to show you some of my recent designs that blend both approaches. Imara held up her hand. Actually, I'd like to continue speaking with Merritt. Perhaps we could discuss her design philosophy privately? The look on Pierce's face was worth 3 years of frustration. Bryce forced a smile. Of course, we'll be in the main office when you're finished. Once they left, Imara's professional demeanor softened. Now, we can speak frankly. The committee was deeply impressed with Design 347. The anonymous submission process was specifically implemented to identify innovation regardless of firm size or designer reputation. My mouth went dry. That's an excellent approach. That's an excellent approach. It is, and it's yielded some surprising results. She studied me intently. The design shows remarkable attention to detail. The creator clearly understands both the science of ecosystems and the aesthetics needed for a high-profile installation. I nodded, uncertain how to respond without revealing myself. Tell me, Merritt, are your talents truly appreciated here at Pinewood? The directness of her question caught me off guard. Before I could formulate a diplomatic answer, Deb approached with a customer inquiry. I excused myself to answer a quick question about pollinator plants. When I returned, Imara was examining my hand-drawn plant community diagrams posted near the butterfly section. These are impressive, she said. The line quality and attention to plant interactions reminds me of, she paused, studying me, reminds me of the finalist design I mentioned. My chest tightened. She suspected or knew I was the designer. The governor isn't just looking for a design, Imara continued. He's looking for the right designer, someone who can articulate the vision, supervise the implementation, and educate the public about sustainable landscaping principles. That sounds like an incredible opportunity. It would be, particularly for someone whose talents might be underutilized in their current position. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from Bryce. What's taking so long? Bring her to the office now. I pocketed my phone. It seems my boss is getting impatient. I imagine he is. Imara smiled knowingly. Before we join them, I should mention that the selection committee will announce the final design choice next week. The selected designer will be offered a state contract that includes both the mansion project and a role developing sustainability guidelines for all state properties. My heart raced at the possibility, a chance to implement my vision on a statewide scale, free from Pinewood's limitations. That would be a career-defining opportunity for any landscape designer, I said. Yes, particularly one whose innovations haven't been fully recognized. Imara handed me her business card. My direct number is on the back. I'd welcome a conversation about your career aspirations, regardless of the committee's final decision. As we walked toward the main office, I felt lighter than I had in years. For the first time, someone with actual influence recognized my work, even suspected it was mine despite the anonymous submission. Bryce's office buzzed with nervous energy as we entered. He'd assembled the entire design team, portfolios open to their most impressive projects. Pierce stood front and center, ready to take command of the conversation. Mrs. Reed, we've prepared a presentation of our most innovative, sustainable projects, Bryce began. That won't be necessary today, Imara replied smoothly. I've seen what I needed to see. The committee will make its final decision next week. But we haven't shown you our commercial portfolio, Pierce protested. My recent municipal project. I'm particularly interested in native plant integration and water conservation techniques, Imara interrupted. Based on what I've observed, I have a clear understanding of Pinewood's capabilities in those areas. Her eyes briefly met mine, a silent acknowledgement passing between us. Then she thanked Bryce for his time and departed, leaving a wake of confusion behind her. What exactly did you tell her? Bryce demanded once she was gone. I showed her my demonstration garden and answered her questions about native plants. I replied calmly. That's it? She spent 30 minutes with you to look at some weedy flowers? The dismissive comment stung, but I maintained my composure. She seemed particularly interested in ecological approaches to landscape design, which is exactly what my municipal project showcases, Pierce interjected. You should have brought her to see my portfolio. I met his gaze steadily. She specifically asked to see the native plant demonstration area. Bryce ran a hand through his hair. This is a major opportunity for Pinewood. If they select one of those finalist designs, we could be the firm implementing a high-profile state project. Imagine the publicity, Lucinda added. It would establish us as leaders in sustainable landscaping. The irony wasn't lost on me. For 3 years, they'd marginalized my sustainable approaches. Now they wanted to claim expertise in the very methods they'd dismissed. We need to present a united front next week, Bryce continued. Pierce will lead our presentation to the selection committee. Actually, I said quietly, I won't be available next Wednesday. I've scheduled a personal day. Bryce stared at me. Reschedule it. This is priority. I'm afraid I can't. It's a medical appointment I've waited 3 months to secure. The lie came easily, surprising me. I had no appointment, but I had no intention of watching Pierce present himself as Pinewood's sustainability expert to the committee that was considering my design. This is exactly the problem, Pierce muttered. No team perspective. I gathered my things without responding. As I headed toward the door, Bryce called after me. Merritt, we need to discuss your attitude. First thing tomorrow. I turned back. I look forward to it. That night, I sat on my balcony, reviewing the job descriptions I'd found online. 3 landscape firms in neighboring counties were seeking designers with sustainable expertise. 2 parks departments had posted environmental educator positions. The options weren't limitless, but they existed. My phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. Design 347 has advanced to the final 3. Committee meeting Wednesday to make selection. Thought you might want to know. IR? I stared at the message from Imara Reed, my hands trembling with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. My design was in the final 3. By Wednesday, I would know if my vision for the governor's mansion had won, anonymously, on merit alone. The realization settled over me like the first warm day of spring. Regardless of the outcome, everything was about to change. Tuesday morning arrived with a message from Bryce. Meeting postponed. Working from home today. See you tomorrow. A convenient absence. I spent the day tending to customer needs and finalizing plant orders while dodging Pierce's repeated questions about my conversation with Imara. Each time he approached, I found a new customer requiring assistance or plants needing urgent attention. By closing time, an unfamiliar calm had settled over me. Tomorrow would bring the committee's decision, and regardless of the outcome, I had options. For the first time in 3 years, I felt the weight of Pinewood's limitations lifting from my shoulders. That evening, I spread my seed catalogs across my kitchen table and began drafting a business plan. If I was going to leave Pinewood, I needed clarity about my next steps. Native plant nursery, design consultancy, educational workshops. The possibilities energized me more than I'd felt in months. My phone rang shortly after 9. Deb's name flashed on the screen. "You need to come in early tomorrow," she said without preamble. "Something's happening." "What do you mean?" "Bryce called an emergency staff meeting for 7:30. Pierce has been making photocopies of your client notes and design sketches all afternoon." My stomach tightened. "Why?" "I don't know exactly, but I overheard him telling Truman they needed to prepare for all contingencies regarding the governor's project. Merit. I think they're planning something." Sleep eluded me that night. I arrived at Pinewood at 7:15 the next morning to find the parking lot already full. Through the conference room windows, I could see the entire design team gathered around the table, heads bent over documents. When I entered, conversation stopped abruptly. Spread across the table were copies of my design sketches, client notes, and plant lists, all taken from my files without permission. "Good morning," I said, surveying the scene. "Interesting reading material." Bryce cleared his throat. "We're preparing for the committee presentation. If Pinewood is selected to implement one of the finalist designs, we need to demonstrate our expertise in sustainable landscaping." "Using my work. Using company resources," Pierce corrected. "Everything you've created here belongs to Pinewood. Using company resources." Technically true, but the implications were clear. They planned to present my innovations, my techniques, and my expertise as collective company knowledge, with Pierce positioned as the sustainability expert. "I see," I said simply, taking a seat. Bryce outlined their strategy. Pierce would lead the presentation, showcasing Pinewood's approach to sustainable design. Truman and Lucinda would provide supporting examples of similar projects, my projects, rebranded under their names. I would attend but remain in a supporting role. "Questions?" Bryce asked when he finished. "Just one," I replied. "What time is the committee meeting?" 2 o'clock. We should arrive by 1:30 to set up." I nodded, making a mental note. The timing worked perfectly. "Now," Bryce continued, "we need to prepare responses to potential technical questions. Merit, the committee will likely ask about native plant selections and water conservation. We'll need you to brief Pierce on appropriate answers." For the next 2 hours, I answered their questions about ecological principles, soil biology, and water management systems. I explained the science behind my designs, watching as Pierce frantically took notes on concepts he'd previously dismissed as unnecessary complications. At 10 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a calendar alert I'd set months ago. Native Plant Society grant application deadline. "I need to step out," I announced, standing. "I promised Mrs. Hawthorne I'd help her select plants for her butterfly garden this morning." "This meeting takes priority," Bryce insisted. "Mrs. Hawthorne is your biggest client," I reminded him. "Her gardening group brings in thousands in annual revenue. I'll be back in an hour." Before he could protest further, I walked out, leaving them surrounded by my copied designs. Instead of helping Mrs. Hawthorne, who had no appointment, I drove to the coffee shop 3 blocks away and opened my laptop. The grant application had been on my radar for months, funding for an independent project promoting native plant education. I'd started the application but abandoned it, believing my future remained at Pinewood. Now, I completed it with renewed purpose, outlining my vision for community workshops and demonstration gardens independent of corporate interests. After submitting the application, I composed a brief professional email to Amara Reed. "Thank you for your interest in sustainable landscape design. I'm writing to express my interest in discussing potential opportunities with the State Environmental Commission, regardless of the Governor's Mansion Initiative outcome. My commitment to ecological landscaping extends beyond my current position, and I would welcome a conversation about how my expertise might serve broader community needs." I pressed send, then ordered another coffee, watching the clock. At 11:30, I returned to Pinewood, where the strategy meeting continued without interruption. Pierce had moved from taking notes to practicing his presentation, reading directly from my design philosophy statement while Bryce nodded approvingly. "Welcome back," Lucinda said with forced brightness. Pierce was just practicing his explanation of rainwater management systems. "So I hear," I replied, resuming my seat. "That particular explanation comes from my presentation at last year's Water Conservation Symposium." Pierce faltered, then continued reading my words as if they were his own. I said nothing further, letting the discomfort build in the room. At noon, Bryce called a lunch break. Be back by 12:45. We'll leave for the committee meeting at 1 sharp. As everyone filed out, Deb caught my eye and tilted her head toward the greenhouse. I followed her there, away from curious ears. They're stealing everything you've built, she whispered. 3 years of your work, and they're packaging it as a team effort with Pierce as the face. I'm aware. What are you going to do? I smiled, the calm in my chest surprising even me. I'm going to let them. What? After everything they've done? Sometimes the best response isn't confrontation, but allowing people to reveal themselves fully. Deb studied my face. You're planning something. I'm merely allowing events to unfold naturally. At 12:55, I returned to the conference room where the team was gathering their materials. Bryce looked up with visible relief. There you are. We were concerned you might be late. I wouldn't miss this opportunity, I assured him. As they packed up presentation boards and plant samples, my phone buzzed with a text from Imara. Committee convening early. Can you come now? I looked up at the busy team. I just remembered I left some important client files in my car. I'll meet you there. Before anyone could question me, I walked quickly to the parking lot, got in my car, and drove directly to the state capitol building. The security guard checked my ID and directed me to the Environmental Commission offices on the 3rd floor. Imara met me in the reception area, professional but with a warmth in her eyes. Thank you for coming early. The committee has some specific questions before making their final decision. She led me to a conference room where 7 people sat around a polished table. In the center lay 3 landscape designs, including mine. Committee members, this is Merritt Bloom, currently with Pinewood Garden Center. I shook hands with each person as Imara introduced them. The governor's chief of staff, the state botanist, 2 landscape architecture professors, the Capitol grounds supervisor, and a prominent environmental advocate. The chief of staff spoke first. Miss Bloom, we're impressed with Design 347. The integration of ecological principles with aesthetic considerations shows remarkable sophistication. Thank you, I said simply. A moment of silence followed before the state botanist leaned forward. Are you acknowledging this is your design? The directness of the question caught me off guard. I glanced at Imara, who nodded encouragingly. Yes, I confirmed. I created Design 347. Interesting, the chief of staff said. Because we received a call this morning from Bryce Pinewood claiming that his design team, led by Pierce Pinewood, created this submission. He specifically mentioned it was a collaborative effort with Pierce as the primary designer. My breath caught. They had gone further than I anticipated, not just stealing my ideas, but actively claiming credit for my anonymous submission. That is categorically false, I stated. I created this design independently, outside of work hours, using my personal resources. No one at Pinewood has seen this design. Can you prove that? One of the professors asked. I opened my laptop and pulled up my personal cloud drive. These are my original sketches, dated 3 weeks before the submission deadline. You'll notice they include personal notes about plant selections based on visits to local natural areas. I can also show you the evolution of the design through multiple iterations. For the next 20 minutes, I walked them through my design process, explaining ecological considerations and answering technical questions. The more I spoke, the more animated the committee members became, asking deeper questions about soil biology, water management, and native plant communities. One last question, the environmental advocate said. Why did you submit anonymously rather than through Pinewood? I took a deep breath because I knew my design wouldn't be supported by my employer. Pinewood Garden Center presents itself as forward-thinking, but in practice, it resists truly sustainable approaches that might reduce chemical sales or maintenance contracts. That's a serious allegation, the chief of staff noted. It's my lived experience over 3 years, I replied. I've been denied promotion 3 times despite bringing in significant new business. My demonstration gardens are relegated to low-visibility areas. My workshop materials regularly disappear before classes. When I succeed despite these obstacles, others are given credit for my work. As I finished speaking, the door opened. Bryce, Pierce, and the rest of the Pinewood team filed in, surprise registering on their faces when they saw me already seated with the committee. Mr. Pinewood, Imara said coolly, thank you for joining us. We were just discussing Design 347 with its creator. Bryce paled visibly. Pierce stepped forward, portfolio in hand. There seems to be some confusion. As I was about to present, Our team at Pinewood developed that design collaboratively. With my direction, the state botanist raised an eyebrow. That's interesting, because Miss Bloom has just shown us her original sketches and development process. Perhaps you could show us yours? Pierce opened his portfolio, revealing the photocopied pages of my client notes and design sketches, none related to the governor's mansion design. These are supporting materials, he stammered. The actual design submission was a team effort. Mr. Pinewood, Imara said firmly. This committee selected finalists through an anonymous process specifically to judge designs on merit alone. We've verified Miss Bloom as the creator of Design 347, which has been selected as our winner. The committee has also voted unanimously to offer her the implementation contract and the position of State Sustainability Director. The room fell silent. Bryce's face flushed deep red while Pierce stared at me with undisguised hatred. Furthermore, Imara continued, given the apparent attempt to misrepresent authorship of this submission, the committee has decided that Pinewood Garden Center will not be considered as the implementation contractor. Miss Bloom will have full authority to select her own implementation team. This is outrageous, Bryce sputtered. Merit is our employee. Her work belongs to Pinewood. Actually, I interjected calmly, the contest rules specifically stated that submissions must be original work, not created as work for hire. I designed this on my own time, using my own resources. Nothing in my employment contract prevents me from pursuing independent projects outside of work hours. The chief of staff stood. Congratulations, Miss Bloom. The governor looks forward to working with you on transforming the mansion grounds, and eventually, all state properties, into showcases of sustainable landscaping. 2 weeks later, I stood on the mansion lawn, supervising the first native plant installations. My team, including Deb, who had eagerly accepted my job offer, worked efficiently around me. In the distance, a news crew interviewed the governor about the innovative ecological approach to the mansion renovation. My phone buzzed with a text from Imara. Local news reporting Pinewood Garden Center filing for restructuring. Apparently, their 3 largest commercial clients have terminated contracts. Something about seeking more forward-thinking landscape services. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and knelt to check the soil moisture around a newly planted serviceberry. The garden was coming to life exactly as I had envisioned it, a living ecosystem that would inspire change throughout the state. As visitors gathered for the first public tour of the renovation, I stood to address them, catching sight of Pierce watching from the sidelines, jobless and fuming. Welcome to the governor's Sustainable Landscape Initiative, I began. Today marks the beginning of a new approach to public spaces, one that works with nature rather than against it. Just like these native plants, good ideas need the right environment to flourish. Sometimes that means finding a new place to put down roots. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe. Have you ever had to leave a situation to find the recognition you deserved? Share your experiences in the comments. I'd love to hear how you found your own path to success despite the obstacles.